てみたい。足し線の合わせてほしいの。サマータイム。君の虜になってしまえばきっとこの夏は充実するの。もっともう戻れなくたって忘れないで。でも気持ちを伝えてしまえばいつかこの夢は覚めてしまうだろうな。青い影が揺れるアンチカット。君の虜になってしまえばきっとこの夏は充実するの。もっともう戻れなくたって忘れないで。でも気持ちを伝えてしまえばいつかこの夢は覚めてしまうだろうな。青い影が揺れるアンチカット。君の虜になってしまえばきっとこの夏は充実するの。もっともう戻れなくたって忘れないで。でも気持ちを伝えてしまえばいつかこの夢は覚めてしまうだろうな。青い影が揺れるアンチカット。何年経っても言えない後悔したって今はない。でも言葉はここまで出てるの。サマータイム。海岸通りを歩きたい。ドライブだってしてみたい。足し線の合わせてほしいの。サマータイム。君の虜になってしまえばきっとこの夏は充実するの。もっともう戻れなくたって忘れないで。 summertime. Kimi no toriko ni natte shimaeba kitto kono natsu wa chujitsu suru no motto mou motorre naku tatte wasurenai deでも気持ちを伝えてしまえばいつかこの夢は覚めてしまうだろうな青い影が揺れる街角君の虜になってしまえばきっとこの夏は充実するのもっともう戻れなくたって忘れないででも気持ちを伝えてしまえばいつかこの夢は覚めてしまうだろうな青い影が揺れる街角君の虜になってしまえばきっとこの夏は充実するのもっともう戻れなくたって忘れないででも気持ちを伝えてしまえばいつかこの夢は覚めてしまうだろうな青い影が揺れる街角何年経っても言えない後悔したって今はないでも言葉はここまで出てるのSummertime 海岸通りを歩きたいドライブだってしてみたい足し線を合わせてほしいのSummertime君の虜になってしまえばきっとこの夏は充実するのもっともう戻れなくたって忘れないででも気持ちを伝えてしまえばいつかこの夢は覚めてしまうだろうな青い影が揺れる街角君の虜になってしまえばきっとこの夏は充実するのもっともう戻れなくたって忘れないででも気持ちを伝えてしまえばいつかこの夢は覚めてしまうだろうな青い影が揺れる街角
Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
Hello.
Welcome back to Mushoku
So-
Tensei. We are hopefully going to finish up Volume 11 tonight. It'd be nice if we can. We only got 30% of the book left. And I don't remember if these are long chapters or short chapters, but it shouldn't be too much. I mean, we do have 4 main chapters and I think 1 side chapter left, but this is all taking place in the Beggarit uh, desert. So I can't remember if there's anything necessarily left out from. Oh no, there is something left out from the anime. So there will be stuff
Oh,
that gets discussed or read in tonight's chapter that will not have shown up in the anime. So we have book only content going right now. Also, I want to point out for those of you who are missing some slime content, I want to go ahead and just throw this out there. The last manga chapter that came out for slime over on K Manga, you should definitely go check it out. Uh, it literally shows Diablo running around to all the different locations where the other primals are and talking to them about possibly joining Rimuru. And what's been really, really cool about that is the manga is incorporating the movie storylines into it.
Hmm.
Because
ooh.
because Violet and Diablo have already met because of the first movie, and I think Jean showed up in may have shown up as part of movie two, but yeah, they are incorporating some of the movie stuff. It was either Jean or Blanc. I can't remember which one. I think it was Blanc. I don't think Diablo's encountered Jean. I think it was Blanc. But anyway, so white, violet, and yellow. He has met with the three of them. So there we go. Alrighty. Don't have much to say. Moon's turn to read tonight. You guys are in for a treat. There's some good content in this at the tail end of this volume as well. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Moon, take it away.
Yep. Our journey across the desert began the next morning. The attack by that succubus had at least woken me up to the dangers we were facing here. I'd spent the last few years in a nice, safe university town, and it might have dulled my instincts. They hadn't been that sharp to begin with, but I'd definitely gotten a bit too relaxed about things. We were on the Begarit continent now. This place wasn't nearly as safe as the central continent. I needed to get my head in the game, or I was going to get us both killed. Let's try to stay covered up for now, I suggested as we got underway. Make sure you keep yourself hydrated too. Let me know if your canteen runs dry. Of course. The two of us were wearing coats and had hoods over our heads. Exposing any skin could be dangerous out here. If we'd brought Cliff along, I had a feeling he would have been complaining about being so bundled up in this heat. Although we were in the middle of a desert, I could refill our water supply with magic, whenever it was necessary. Still, neither I nor Linelise had any experience with this kind of terrain, and there was no telling what we'd find on the road ahead of us. There was a risk I'd get heat stroke and find myself unable to use any spells at all, for instance. We had to play this carefully. Shall I set our course due north then? Linelise said. Yeah, please do. Nanahoshi's map indicated that the nearest town lay in that direction, although it was rough at best. Linelise didn't need a compass to orient us, a relatively well-known elven ability. They never lost their sense of direction, even in forests so thick you couldn't see the sun. With that ability, along with the skills she'd picked up over the years, I was confident she would keep us on track regardless of any obstacle we encountered. Come to think of it, I'd met quite a few people who could find their way through tricky terrain using nothing but a basic map. I guess it was a skill you developed with enough practice. It really is hot out here, though, she sighed. I could try to whip up a rainstorm around us if you want. Let's not, dear. It would probably attract hordes of monsters. Desert animals were always on the lookout for sources of water. The thought reminded me of hordes of lizards that had emerged during the rainy season in the Great Forest. Still, I'd heard it said that the monsters on this continent couldn't endure cold. If we ever got swarmed, I could try freezing the air all around us, as long as I could do it without accidentally hurting Elise. For now, though, I just followed along behind her. This was my first time walking in a desert. It felt like my feet were sinking into the ground with every step. Fortunately, I'd gotten used to moving through the snow up in the northern territories. This wasn't exactly the same, but my ability to step lightly still came in handy. I felt like I could keep it up all day without getting too worn out. This initial optimism proved to be a bit misguided, though. Only a few hours later, I found myself growing increasingly exhausted. The sun beating down on us was the main issue, that and scorching winds that kept blowing in my face. I could tell my temperature was elevated, and I was starting to feel a little dizzy. I was rehydrating as often as I could, but that sense of fatigue was still building fast. Maybe I ought to have summoned up a cloud or two above us after all. In comparison, Elenalise was still in surprisingly good shape. You don't have as much stamina as I expected, Rudius. The sand isn't that much of a problem since I'm used to walking through the snow, but this heat is really brutal. To be fair, I suppose Cliff and Zenoba would have collapsed by now. It was the right call not to bring them along. It never ceased to amaze me how monstrously tough the warriors of this world were. Maybe this unnatural stamina had something to do with the battle aura thing, too. I was more than a little jealous. In any case, this heat was bad news. It felt like the sweat was vaporizing before it could even trickle down my face. Up in the northern territories, cold had been the major problem. Back then, I could generate a pocket of heat around me using magic, a practical application of the spell burn in place. Maybe there was a variation that would make this place more tolerable. Oh, oh, that's nice and cool, Elinely said. Did you do something, Rudius? Yeah, I'm trying to lower the temperature around us just a little. After a little trial and error, I managed to cool things down by about 5 degrees Celsius. It was still brutally hot, though. The sun was just too powerful. I had a thick hood on, but it still felt like the top of my head was on fire. Maybe we should have brought parasols or something. For now, I supplemented my cooling spell by magically freezing the water inside one of my canteens and slipping it inside my clothing. I could just freeze it again when the ice melted. These adjustments made things a bit more tolerable. I wasn't comfortable, but I could withstand the heat. I encountered multiple monsters that first day. The first creature we ran into was a giant scorpion, perhaps 2 meters in length. Its tail was split in two, and I could lash both sides around and it could lash both sides around independently of the other. Elena Elise told me afterward that it was called the Twin Death Scorpion. Its sting delivered a very dangerous poison that could only be cured by intermediate level detoxification magic, which made me glad I'd taken the time to learn that tier. The creature had a relatively tough carapace, but it wasn't too nimble. Elenalise pinned it in place, and I shot it dead with a stone cannon in about 2 seconds. The thing was supposedly a B rank monster, but it posed no threat at all to us. We worked well together. If Elenalise had been here on her own, though, she might have had a harder time. I wasn't sure if her attacks could do much damage to a heavily armored enemy. Phew, those things certainly are large, aren't they? Said Elenalise. I don't know. It seemed normal enough to me. Well, it was about the same size as the monsters on the demon continent, wasn't it? Yeah, I guess you're right. The monsters of the Beggarit continent weren't supposed to be comparable to those of the demon continent. It was a bit odd that the first one we encountered was so large. I'd been expecting something maybe half this size. Maybe the scorpions are just unusually big, Elenalise ventured. Sure, maybe. Sometimes you just run into the most dangerous monsters right off the bat, don't you? Not particularly often, I'd say. Maybe the monsters in this area are just on the stronger side then. That seems a bit more likely. Still, we kept moving at our usual pace. The next monster we encountered was a treant, a common foe this time. This one was a spiky green cactus treant rather than a walking tree. It was a C rank monster capable of shooting needles at its enemies and using basic earth magic, but once again, it didn't pose us much of a challenge. It's almost reassuring to run. It's almost reassuring to run into a treant, isn't it? Said Elenalise, wiping off her blade after we were done. I guess so. They really are everywhere, aren't they? Almost like slimes. Hmm? Slimes? But those only live deep inside caves. Sorry, just ignore me. Anyway, it's too bad the ones out here are cacti, not trees. We can't exactly use their bodies for firewood. Yes, they're far too saturated with water, I'd imagine. That might be helpful in its own right, but we already have our magic. By now, Elenalise could use basic water magic spells herself. I'd assumed she was skipping all her classes, but I guess she managed to learn what she needed. The next threat arrived suddenly and without warning. We're under attack! Shouted Elenalise, leaping back to my side. A split second later, something gigantic burst up out of the ground, just ahead of where she'd been standing. It was a worm. An extremely large worm, maybe a meter thick and at least 5 meters long. It let out a strange barking sound in midair, then plunged back into the sand and disappeared. Good lord, that startled me, she said. What was that thing, Elenalise? A sandworm, I suppose. A very large one. Sandworms were monsters that sat waiting patiently under the sand, then burst up to attack when prey happened to pass nearby. I'd never seen one before, but apparently there were similar creatures in the great forests. Their sizes differed greatly, though. The forest dwelling ones were only about 20 or 30 centimeters thick, and they could maybe bite off your leg at worst. I hear they have big ones in the demon continent as well, Elinley said. You've never seen one? Most of the monsters I ran into there were just snakes and wolves. Oh, that and some weird walking armor thing. Walking armor? What was this, a soul breaker? Nah, they called it an executioner. It's the one with the big sword. Ah, those are a stronger variety. You don't want to run into one of them when you're on your own. It seemed the sandworms here were unusually large too. I'd caught a glimpse of 5 meters of its body, but the rest was still underground. It might be as much as 10 meters long in total. That made them large enough to swallow a man whole. If you happened to wander over one without noticing, it was the equivalent of stepping on an instant death trap. Oh, wait, what? If you happened to wander over one without noticing, it was the equivalent of stepping on an instant death trap. Still, they didn't pose much danger as long as you could avoid their initial attack. I turned the ground where the sandworm was rooted, chopping it up with blades of hardened sand. It died without even a shriek. A small puddle of fluid formed around the part of its body that had burst from the surface. If they've got caterpillars that big around here, I wonder what the butterflies are like, I mused. Maybe that's what they call the succubi. They're a bit like butterflies of the night, aren't they? Does that mean you started off as a bug yourself, Little Elise? Well, we all have our awkward early years, you know. So she wasn't denying that she was a succubus. Now I was curious about her caterpillar years, though. Was she hanging around the school library with a big pair of dorky glasses, working the fields in a pair of dirty overalls? Either way, I had the feeling Cliff would get really excited if he could see a photo. It always tickles a man's heart to see an unexpected side of a girl he loves. The last monsters we met that day were a group of ants. We spotted them after crossing over a particularly large sand dune. The next instant, Elinalise threw me down to the ground. We ended up sliding halfway back down the hill we'd just climbed. Hey, what are you doing? That's an army of phalanx ants. That didn't mean much to me, but I followed Elinalise's lead, slowly crawling back up the dune. This involved staring at her butt for quite a while. Always a sight for sore eyes. Would Sylvie end up rounding out like this in a few years? Her butt was beautiful just the way it was, but I wouldn't mind getting more of it. Be quiet, Rudius. We don't want to provoke them. Pressing ourselves flat against the slope of the hill, we peered out over the crest of the at the phalanx ants below. Bright red creatures marching along in an orderly formation. Each ant was maybe 30 centimeters to a meter in size. Some were on the larger side of the spectrum, and others were noticeably smaller. They also came in different shapes. I saw a few with wings, and even some who had oddly human-looking lower bodies. Despite the variations in their ranks, the creatures were marching single-mindedly towards the same destination. It was basically a river of oversized army ants down there. The line stretched as far as the eye could see on either side. I couldn't even begin to guess how many of them there were. Given their size and numbers, that's definitely an S-rank threat, Elenalise said. Wow, really? Mind explaining? I'm a little curious. Phalanx ants are one of the most dangerous monsters out there. They're known for their insatiable appetite and their ability to consume anything in their path. Those ones are particularly massive, too. They must be a species unique to this continent. It seemed phalanx ants were mutant versions of a more typical species of army ants. Unlike other ants, they didn't establish static colonies, but spent their lives in constant motion, eating everything in their path. They did have a number of natural predators, but their sheer number made them capable of overwhelming any terrestrial foes, even stray dragons. At certain intervals, they would pause their journey to make a temporary nest, where they bred, replenishing their numbers with the next generation, similar to the behavior of normal army ants. However, since these were monsters rather than normal animals, they were smarter and more aggressive than the species they developed from. If we started strolling casually along the dune, they would swarm us in the blink of an eye, even if we weren't aggressive toward them. None of the none of the individual ants are that powerful. Those ones down there are probably E rank, maybe D or C for the larger ones. Well, C rank's nothing to scoff at. And from the looks of things, there were thousands and thousands of them. The danger a monster posed wasn't evaluated in a vacuum. The danger a monster posed wasn't evaluated in a vacuum anyway. You had to consider their tendency to move in groups. Even D or C rank monsters would be a rank A threat if you got a dozen of them together. In a group of thousands, they'd definitely be a high S. I'd played a few video games in my old life where you battled ants 3 times the size of human being, but there was no real need for them to be this big, especially considering how quick and powerful monsters were for especially considering how quick and powerful monsters were for their size. Oh, that must be the queen. Elise pointed out a particularly large ant among the crowd. It was at least 2 meters in length and had the upper body of a female human. Reminded me a bit of a boss in an old RPG I'd played once. In my old world, even the queen army ants were maybe 15 millimeters in size. These things had to be, what, 50 times larger? That was scary, all right. There were lots of monsters that traveled in large groups here, and they tended to be very good at working together in battle. If I threw out an attack spell, they'd probably form up into perfect Roman army formations and charge me from all sides. For all we knew, there might even be some with long range or magical attacks. Maybe we'd stand a chance if I had used some massive spell to hit all of them at once. No, if I tried to hurl a nuke that big, I would probably end up hitting us as well. Rudius? Why do you look like you're getting ready to fight? What? I'm not. Well, you're clearly thinking about how you'd try to kill them. Well, was it really written that clearly on my face? What was I? Some kind of battle-hungry barbarian? Sorry, I was just thinking about how to get away if they noticed us. All right. All right, then. But we're just going to sit here and wait until the whole army marches past. You understand? Right, I said with a nod. Got it. It wasn't like I was going to get any XP for smashing my way through 500,000 killer ants. Their body parts might be worth something as a raw material, but I couldn't imagine dragging those heavy carapaces around in this brutal heat. And our objective was to make it to Rapan as soon as possible, not to make a name for ourselves as ant slayers. This was basically a scouting mission. I needed to remember that. It took about an hour of waiting, but eventually the massive army of ants finished marching past our position. In the desert, the sun turned red as it set. The sand began to glow crimson, and pools of shadow formed underneath the dunes, transforming the scene from a monotonous sandy brown into a striking pattern of vivid red and blacks. It felt like we'd stepped into a different world. Still, a desert was a desert. The Sahara back in my old world had probably looked like this in the evening as well. The temperature's going down fast, I observed. We might be able to make more progress in the night, honestly. I suppose you're right. Let's keep moving for now, then. Sure, I'm... As we were speaking, I heard something flittering through the air nearby. Looking up, I spotted a group of bats about 50 centimeters in length. They were flapping around loudly and circling the area. I hadn't noticed any of these during the day. They probably came out at night to feed on bugs and lizards. Those are giant bats, Rudius. Oh, they're monsters? A borderline case, but they move in groups. We should be careful. As a monster, the giant bat was probably an F rank threat, or maybe E rank if you got a large enough swarm of them. They didn't have much in the way of offense or magical powers, and weren't aggressive toward humans. The main issue seemed to be that all the flapping could get kind of annoying. Huh? Wait, what's the matter with these things? For some reason, though, these ones were flocking around Elise. They didn't seem to be attacking her, but they had her all but surrounded. Were those all males, maybe? Hey, Rudius, don't just watch. Help me. Yeah, sure. Nimble as Elise was, she couldn't very well keep moving with a wall of bats surrounding her. I'd have to knock them all away with a little tornado or something. But just as I was preparing to cast my spell, I noticed one particularly large silhouette inside the swarm of bats. It was a humanoid figure with bat wings, and it was skipping towards us in a weirdly slinky way. And there was a hint of something sweet in the air. It was a succubus. Oh crap! Stone cannon! I smacked my big, hard rock right into the little seductress. Grimacing in agony, she clutched at her stomach and hopped backward, then turned to flee. I'd unconsciously dialed back the spell to a non lethal level. It was hard for me to kill something that looked so human. It was time to face the facts. I was not cut out to be a succubus exterminator. I couldn't bring myself to kill the things, and whenever I got a good whiff of their scent, or their pheromones, or whatever, I sort of lost my grip on reality. If I ever found myself in close combat against one, they'd beat me easily. Of course, as long as I had the benefit of distance, I could take them out with a single stone cannon shot. If I could see them coming, they weren't a threat. In terms of combat ability, a succubus was probably the equivalent of an E rank monster, but it was usually classified as a C rank instead. Its ability to mesmerize made it powerful. Good thing I wasn't a virgin anymore. If I didn't have those sweet memories of my nights with Sylphie to fall back on, I wouldn't stand a chance against those things. Even in my previous life, I had a soft spot for succubi. The ones in that world tended to wear a ton of makeup, but that was fine as long as they never let you see what was really underneath the paint. You just had to let yourself believe the illusion. Long story short, it wasn't my fault if I got really horny and grabbed a little Elise from behind after we cleared out the last of the giant bats. I was a victim of circumstances. Hey, Rudius, get a hold of yourself. Use that detoxification spell already. Stop rubbing yourself against me. Come on, please. Just a little. I won't even put it in all the way. Why don't I just use the back entrance? That doesn't count as cheating, right? Stop being such an idiot. My persistent groping was answered with a vicious shield chop. If Elenalise was a character in a visual novel, they'd probably call her a childishly violent heroine. On the internet. Not that she wasn't fully justified, of course. In any case, the pain restored my sanity somewhat, and I used my detoxification spell. Sorry for the hassle, Elenalise. That's all right. It's the monster's fault, not yours. Man, it really hurts where she smacked me. She swings that thing like a club. Honestly, I hope we've seen the last of those. Oh, wait. Honestly, I hope we've seen the last of those awful creatures. Now you've got me all worked up. Smacking her flushed cheeks, Elenalise shook her head vigorously. My mating rituals had apparently done some damage this time. It was the succubus's fault at the end of the day, but that didn't matter. She'd been justified in hitting me. My jaw was going to be aching for a while, but these things happen. Those bats seemed like they were under the succubus's control, didn't they? Yeah, I guess so. The central continent had monsters that commanded weaker monsters as well. The first monster I'd ever seen in this world was one of them, in fact. What was it called again? I'd only seen it that once, so it had slipped my mind. Some kind of boar-like creature that walked on two legs. Apparently, the succubi could control swarms of giant bats in the same way. When they saw men and women traveling together, they'd order the bats to attack the women and take the opportunity to seduce the males. They brought the men back to their lairs, where they'd wring them dry and then literally eat them. I could take the things down at a distance with a single attack, but a swordsman or warrior used to melee combat would probably be in deep trouble. How could you possibly deal with that scent up close? The longer the fight lasted, the harder it would be to focus. Even the most pure-hearted of knights would eventually fall to their knees. Gay men were probably the only people who stood a fighting chance. What is it this time? Not long after our battle with the succubus, a two-legged lizard that resembled a velociraptor popped up over a nearby sand dune. More quickly followed, and soon they were moving towards us. They weren't especially large, but there were more than a dozen of them. A few made an immediate beeline for the fallen giant bats and started to feed on them. I've never seen these things before, said Elenalise, raising her shield warily. I also readied my staff and watched the creatures carefully. I'm surprised. I thought you knew about every creature out there, Elenalise. I'm not a professional monster researcher, you know. For once, Elenalise couldn't rattle off the name of the enemy we were facing. That probably meant it was a species only found in the Begaric continent. When they spotted us, the raptors hissed loudly and a few jumped to attack. It looked like they were trying to protect their meal more than anything else. Not that they'd really earned it, considering that we'd killed the bats. The raptors were quick and they had sharp claws, but they weren't particularly dangerous. The two of us took out 7 of them in a few seconds, cutting their numbers to about 10. The survivors, realizing the danger they were in, backed away from us warily. It seemed easiest to mop up the survivors with a single big earth spell, but Rudius, be careful. Something huge is coming. A group of larger monsters had been sneaking up on us during the fight. They were giant chickens, maybe 5 meters in height, basically feathered dinosaurs. Their crests were an eye searingly bright shade of red. Apparently, these things were natural predators of the velociraptors. The pack immediately assaulted the lizards, killing most of them and sending the others fleeing frantically. The chickens consumed their victims violently on the spot. That's gotta be a variety of Garuda. On its own, a Garuda was considered a C rank monster, but those that moved in packs were usually classified as B rank threats. These ones were unusually large to boot. We were probably in A rank territory here. Since their battle with the raptors was happening some distance from us, though, the oversized chickens were content to throw a few threatening cries at us rather than attacking. The few surviving lizards were still desperately trying to escape, but they wouldn't last long at this rate. And once the Garuda finished eating them, they'd probably turn on us next. We might be able to handle them, but let's get out of here while the getting's good, Rudius. Something even bigger is coming. And Linalisa's sharp senses had already picked up on a truly massive predator approaching from behind the monster chickens. Got it. As we retreated, Elinalise managed to grab one of the smaller raptor corpses to take with us. It would probably make better eating than the bats. After putting some distance between us and the site of our battle with the raptors, we found a quiet spot to make a temporary shelter. This would be where we spent the rest of our night. Rather than relying on our provisions, we decided to cook and eat the dead raptor that very night. We still had plenty of food, but any adventurer worth their salt tried to supplement their supplies when they could. Today had taught us that the desert was a very different place at night. Once the sun went down, the monsters had just kept coming. If we'd stopped to fight the Garuda, we'd probably have found ourselves facing down a new threat only minutes later. Alinali speculated that the succubus pheromones had attracted the other creatures to that spot. The scent was sweet to males and intolerably foul to females. It was hard to say if that applied to monsters too, but perhaps they'd learned that there was prey to be found when they followed that odor. And of course, the succubi targeted human males, which meant that groups of people would naturally attract swarms of monsters in this desert. The first succubus we'd encountered hadn't brought any giant bats or other creatures with it, but there had been a magical barrier protecting that area. Maybe that succubus had just managed to slip inside alone somehow. Oh crap, what if it was a friend of Orsted's or something? Nah, that can't be right. It wouldn't have just attacked me in that case. It would have asked if I knew him or something, right? Hold on, though. What if it was all just a big cultural misunderstanding? What if that was just how a succubus said hello? In Japan, people like to get to know someone by taking a bath with them. Foreigners could never seem to wrap their heads around that one. Maybe this was something similar. That would be really unfortunate then. I might have accidentally killed an old friend of Orsted's. Was it too late for us to go back and dig her a grave or something? Maybe he'd be less outraged if he saw we'd shown her some respect. No, if he'd posted a guardian out there, Nanahoshi would have mentioned it. And thanks to his curse, most people instinctively hated Orsted. That probably applied to humanoid monsters, too. It was probably just a coincidence, all things considered. I must say, the beggar continent's not much like what I envisioned. Alinalis's yawn echoed inside our little shelter. I envied her ability to relax. Maybe she'd be a little less carefree if she had any idea what Orsted was like. Still, I was just overthinking things at this point. We couldn't start worrying about whether every monster we encountered was actually somebody's friend. The thing had tried to eat me. We'd fought back to protect ourselves. It was that simple. Pushing this unproductive line of thought away, I turned to reply, Yeah, I guess so. There's a lot more monsters than I expected. In terms of the encounter rate, this place seemed even worse than the demon continent. Hopefully we hadn't screwed up and landed ourselves in the divine continent by mistake or anything. Well, we're managing all right for now, and that's what matters. Sure, doesn't mean we can get careless, though. I don't need you to tell me that, dear. Still, if we can keep doing what we did today, we should be able to deal with anything that attacks us. Just make sure you're ready to deal with it if a succubus gets me again, okay? How about you be a little more careful? Our first day in the desert was finally over. It had felt more like a week, honestly. We had a long road ahead of us. Our second day on the road proved no less eventful. In fact, we ran into even more monsters. For how barren this desert looked, it was crawling with critters. The sandworms were particularly nasty. They didn't pose a real threat if you stayed alert and spotted them ahead of time, but sometimes you just had other things demanding your attention, like monsters, for example. At one point, we blundered into a sandworm in the midst of fending off a twin death scorpion. The thing swallowed me whole instantly and started to drag me underground. Startled as I was, I managed to instantly fire off the intermediate spell Wind Slice to rip it apart from the inside. After using earth magic to tunnel my way back above ground, I found that Elise had taken a hit from the scorpion's poisonous stingers. She was down to her knees and her face was purple. She'd been so alarmed to see the sandworm swallow me that she'd lost her focus. I quickly killed the scorpion and used my detoxification magic to save her life. Neither of us had really screwed up this time, honestly. We'd just gotten unlucky. Nice work getting us out of that mess, Rudius. I can see why you acquired such a reputation as an adventurer. Elise certainly didn't blame me for the situation, even though she'd nearly died, and I was the one who'd been more careless. The woman was definitely mature. Don't look so miserable, don't look so miserable, all right, she said. No matter how alert are, no matter how alert you are, sometimes things just get the better of you. We managed to pull through, and that's what matters. The risk of failure was ever present, as was that of death. Elise had been well aware of that from the start. Fortunately, that was our only brush with real danger on that day. We did catch our glimpse of a colossal monster in the distance at one point. It was trudging along slowly, but every step it took set up a huge cloud of sand, visible even from a great distance. That thing had to be hundreds of meters in size. It was hard to describe. I guess you could say it was like a blue whale with the legs of an elephant. That's a that's a behemoth, Rudius. Huh? You seen one of those before, Lise? Oh? Somebody's gotten a bit more casual all of a sudden. I don't know about that. I just try to be respectful with my elders. Zenoba's older than you too, you know. Well, sure, but he's basically just a big kid. Apparently, the behemoth was one of this continent's more famous monsters. They ranged a length from 100 to 1,000 meters. It wasn't clear it wasn't clear what the things ate, but they were only ever sighted in the desert. They had peaceful dispositions, for monsters, and tended to leave people alone unless attacked. A few adventurers claimed to have slain one and found massive numbers of magic stones inside its belly. Hearing these rumors, some people had tried to hunt them for profit, but bringing down a behemoth was much easier said than done. Their outer hide was extremely tough, and given their sheer size, your average adventurer was barely going to scratch them. They had no particular attacks or natural weapons, but simply thrashing their massive bodies around was enough to kill most of their enemies. What if you attacked from a distance then? Well, apparently the creatures were capable of burrowing deep beneath the sand when things started to heat up. Almost no one had actually succeeded in killing one. Additionally, despite their massive size, nobody had ever found a behemoth corpse. This had given rise to rumors that there was a hidden behemoth burial ground somewhere. An exciting concept. It reminded me of similar myths about elephant graveyards back in my old world. But realistically speaking, their corpses were probably just eaten by other monsters. You know, you might be able to take one down if you tried, Rudius. I'm not planning to go around assaulting harmless herbivores for no good reason. Still, if I ever found myself seriously hard up for money, it might be worth a shot to throw some magic at one from a safe distance. On our third day in the desert, we encountered our first sandstorm. Maybe encountered isn't the right word. We were just walking along when we saw something that looked like a wall in the distance, and when we got closer, it turned out to be a wall of sand. Elise and I considered the possibility of waiting for it to die down, but from the looks of things, this was a static storm that blew constantly, in this one location. It didn't look likely to rush past us or disappear, and we were in a hurry, of course. I ended up using my magic to clear the storm until we'd pushed through the area. My professors had told me it was best not to meddle with the weather too much, but this felt like a case where where I was justified. When I turned to look back after about an hour of walking, I found that the sandstorm had reappeared exactly where it had been before. It seemed plausible that it was a sort of magic barrier in its own right, a natural-looking defense of the road that led to Orsted's teleporter, maybe. Nanahoshi hadn't mentioned it, but I seem to remember her saying that she'd been kind of out of it during the trip through the desert. On our fourth day, the number of monsters we encountered decreased sharply. Maybe that sandstorm kept them sealed off in the area we'd just left. There were creatures in this part of the desert too, of course, but they were totally different from the region around the ruin. The scorpions only had one tail, and there were no armies of ants. The sandworms were only about as thick as Lisa's waist now. Also, there didn't seem to be any giant bats flapping around at night. We spotted a few raptors here and there in the twilight hours, but they were smaller and so were their packs. There was no sign of any Garuda. Most importantly, there were no more nocturnal ambushes from the succubi. I guess that was for the best, but maybe a part of me was disappointed. Nah, let's say not. Day 5 was more of the same. We trudged through the same old sand, staring out at the same old featureless landscape. When you're walking through a place without any visible landmarks, it's supposedly easy to end up going in circles when you think you're moving straight forward. It has something to do with the difference in the length of your stride when you're moving your dominant leg. I was confident Elise was keeping us on track, but I was still starting to feel like I'd seen some of these sand dunes before. Doubt crept into my mind. Could she actually be lost? My growing mistrust wasn't a problem in itself, as long as I kept it to myself. Elise would be very annoyed if I voiced any of these thoughts, and if it threw off our teamwork, we might end up dead. The only thing I could do here was be understanding if she did screw up. I needed to say, that's okay, with a big smile. This was a no negativity zone. Rudius, I think I see something in the distance. In the end, my resolve wasn't actually tested. I could indeed make out a vague blur shimmering on the horizon in the direction Elise was pointing. There was definitely something out there. My eyes weren't sharp enough to tell what it was, but its color suggested it wasn't just part of the desert. There was still a possibility it was just a mirage, though. We made our way toward the blur, staying on high alert. Come to think of it, we hadn't run into any monsters today at all. Maybe this area just wasn't home to any. Not that I was going to let my guard down, of course. As I was thinking this, the shape ahead of us grew larger and clearer. It was a giant rock formation that made me think of Ayers Rock, and it was maybe 50 meters in height. The wall facing us looked very steep, if not totally vertical. Climbing to the top would probably be challenging, and it stretched from one side of the horizon to the other with no end in sight. Should we try to find a way around it? Elise asked. No, let's get up on top of it. I'll use my magic. With a simple earth spell, I created a pillar of stone, taking Elise into my arms. I rode it upward like a makeshift elevator. There was no telling what might try to ambush us up there, so I took it fairly slowly. Suddenly, I noticed an odd sensation. Something was rubbing my butt. Elise? What is it? Is there some reason you're groping me? Oh, just force of habit. Think nothing of it. For the several minutes it took us to rise up to the top of the rock shelf, Elise continued feeling me up. Maybe her curse was starting to affect her. I was keeping Cliff's invention supplied with mana, but all it did was buy us more time, and it had been about 10 days since the last time she'd been with Cliff. She could probably hold out a while longer, but the thing was just a prototype. We couldn't trust it blindly. The sooner we got to a city, the better. In the worst case scenario, I'd have to sleep with her myself, but no matter how I tried to spin it, that would be cheating on my wife. It would still be a betrayal, even if I could blame it on the curse. Even if I could blame it on the curse. We decided beforehand that I wasn't going to sleep with Elise on this trip, and I needed to keep that promise. If Bazaar had a brothel where she could hire a male prostitute, that would be ideal. That way, it would just be a business transaction. She could see to her needs without either of us feeling too guilty about it. Elise, we're at the top now. Yes, I suppose we are. Elise was still clinging to me, and she seemed to be staring at my shoulders with some passion in her eyes. You can get off now. Ah, right. Pardon me. Elise stepped off the pillar and away from me, but her eyes quickly drifted downward toward my lower body. I was definitely starting to sense some danger here. Maybe holding her like that on the way up had been a mistake. If I'd just taken a few minutes to think, I could have figured out another way to get us both up there. In retrospect, I felt like she'd been consciously trying to avoid physical contact with me these last few days, and now I'd gone and thrown a wrench in the works. We needed to get to this bizarre place fast. Let's get going, then, she said after a moment. Sure. Only a few seconds after we began to walk, though, a shadow flitted across the ground towards us. Rudius, get down! As Elise shouted out a warning, I threw myself down and forward without even looking upward. An instant later, something zoomed past above me, and a cold tingle ran down my spine. I quickly jumped back to my feet and looked up. We'd been attacked by a monster with the body of a lion and the head of an eagle, beating its massive wings loudly. It thumped to the ground some distance away from us. That's a griffin! Shouted Elenalise, drawing her sword. I quickly focused my thoughts on the battle at hand, readying my staff and turning to face the creature. Er, readying my staff and turning to face the creature that would leave me in an awkwardly exposed position, and Elenalise was currently behind me. A reversal of our usual formation. But even in a situation like this, she could probably maneuver her way to the front line without getting in my line of fire. And then I could fall back to safety. Or so I thought at first. There's two of them, Rudius. You deal with that one. A loud flapping sound from behind confirmed that we'd been caught in a pincer attack. I'd have to deal with Griffin A over here by himself. If I dodged out of its path, it would charge right past me and hit Elenalise from behind. Still, maybe that was the safer route. If she could hold off both of them for a few moments, I'd be able to pick them off one at a time. That would be more like our usual pattern, at least. But we hadn't worked out any plan to that effect in advance. She told me to deal with this one, so if I didn't kill it, she'd be taken by surprise. Right then. The griffin was standing with its body bent forward, its beak half open, glaring fiercely at me. It wasn't far from me, and it looked like an an agile creature. It might be able to dodge my stone cannon or even shrug it off. I wanted to be absolutely sure I killed this thing. It had wings. I wasn't sure how far it could fly on them, but Quagmire probably wouldn't be too effective either. That left my wind magic. The griffin's back legs tensed up suddenly. I was out of time to think. Launching itself forward, with a powerful kick, the monster rushed at me with its legs outstretched like a pouncing tiger. I ducked down and cast the advanced spell Earth Hedgehog at the ground. A circle of 3-meter earthen spikes burst up all around me. Yeah! The griffin instantly beat its wings, but my eye of foresight was kind enough to show me that what it was planning. It adjusts its course in midair, dodges to the side, and tries to take its distance. Whipping my left Whipping my left hand forward, I fired off a wind spell, creating a shockwave in midair that robbed the griffin of its mobility. It spun helplessly for an instant, but before I could follow up, it twisted its body around with cat-like agility, trying to brace itself for a smooth landing. I fired off a stone cannon at the spot it was falling toward. The projectile whistled through the air and struck home, passing straight through the creature's body with a wet crunch. The griffin staggered backward a few steps, then collapsed loudly to the ground. The thing looked dead already, but I finished it off with a fire spell to be absolutely sure, and then spun around to see how Elenalise was faring. Fortunately, she was okay. I saw her fending off the griffin's swipes with her shield while striking at it with her rapier. The griffin's front legs were red with blood. She'd obviously been targeting them persistently, trying to reduce its ability to attack. Heads up, Elenalise! Stone cannon! After a shout of warning, I fired off another deadly projectile. Elenalise sidestepped nimbly out of its path. The griffin didn't follow her. It had noticed me and was trying to dodge into the air, but Elenalise stabbed out with her rapier, striking a shallow blow on its leading leg that dropped it back down. The sharpened stone hit the griffin at the neck and tore through its body, severing its spine on the way out. It crashed to the ground head first and began to convulse. Elenalise strode forward and stabbed the creature in the head to put it out of its misery. I proceeded to burn its body with fire magic. The two of us took a few moments to look around the area for any additional reinforcements, but before finally letting out a sigh of relief. Sorry about that, Rudius. I got a little careless. Nah, I'm the one who wasn't looking above me. After apologizing to each other for our slip-ups, we turned our attention to the road ahead. The top of the rock shelf had a coating of sand here and there, but for the most part it was solid stone. At least we wouldn't have to worry about anything lurking under the surface. Let's make sure we watch the skies from now on. Yes, let's. With that brief battle analysis complete, we set off once again. On day 6, we figured out that the rock shelf was a griffin nesting ground. Multiple creatures seemed to have divided up the area into their own territories, judging by the steady pace of the attacks we faced. Griffins were B-rank monsters. They didn't use any magic, but they were physically powerful and had limited flight capabilities. That added mobility made them much more challenging for a magician like me to target. Most of the time, we encountered them alone, but sometimes you'd get small family packs of 2 to 5. The creatures were clever and could organize coordinated attacks and ambushes, so in a group, they were considered an A-rank threat. They weren't any match for us without the element of surprise, though. Night fell, but no succubi appeared to harass us. They presumably avoided griffin turf from the looks of things. The griffins were pretty territorial once you beat off the locals. There wasn't much risk of another group barging in to attack you that same day. In other words, we were safe here for the moment. For the first time in a while, we made ourselves a campfire and roasted some griffin meat for dinner. The last group we'd beaten was a male, a female, and their child, so we went with the youngest of the three. Young animals tended to be more tender and tastier. I did feel a little bit conflicted as someone who was going to be a father himself before too long, but we do what we have to in order to survive. People are selfish creatures at the end of the day. Fortunately, I'd picked up a few tricks when it came to cooking monster meat, like carrying my own spices with me. The raptors hadn't been particularly tasty, but the griffin was basically part bird and part mammal, so I had higher hopes this time around. For the seasoning, I used 1 part ground kokiri nuts to 2 parts awazu seeds and abi leaves. After mixing and grinding them together, I tested the blend by licking my finger. Mmm, nice and spicy. I rubbed the seasoning evenly across the surfaces of the cut we'd butchered out of the beast, taking care to rub it in well. After adding a sprinkle of salt, I moved on the cooking part. Once the surface was done, I moved the meat a little further from the fire to lower the heat and waited a bit longer. Once the fat was visibly sizzling, we were good to go. Trying not to burn my tongue, I took a cautious, experimental bite. The meat was both tender and juicy. It had a slightly odd flavor to it, but the spices almost completely masked that. Given the way I'd done things, it wasn't cooked completely all the way, though. But that wasn't an issue. And once you chewed off the surface, you could just sprinkle a little more seasoning on. Ah, this really takes me back, said Linelise. Geese always used to carry around little bottles of spice like that, too. Yeah, that seems pretty common with rogue types, doesn't it? After Eris dumped me, I spent several years living the adventure life. Naturally, I'd spent some of that time working in parties. It felt like there was always one guy in every group who'd make his own spices and carry them around. For some reason, it was usually the dagger wielding, lock picking, trap disarming sorts. I'd often notice them squirreling random nuts and leaves away for later. Forged materials weren't just useful for cooking, though. Sometimes you'd run into a monster that recoiled from the strong tastes and smells of certain plants. Some plants also made a decent insect repellent in a pinch. I'd even seen one guy who even tossed some kind of powder in his enemy's eyes to blind them. Pocket sand! I like the way you seasoned this quite a lot, Rudius. Well, that's good to hear. Elenalise was openly licking the fat from her fingers. You wouldn't usually catch her doing that when she was eating in a random tavern, not unless she was trying to seduce someone. Your table manners aren't the best today, Elenalise. Goodness, now you sound like Zenith. Did Mom used to nag you about that? Oh, yes. She flushed bright red and hissed. You're a lady, Elenalise. Try to act like it. Elenalise's imitation of Zenith didn't quite line up with the woman I remembered, but I guess they'd known each other well before I was born. I need water. Give me a sec. Goodness gracious. I found myself wondering about where Zenith was now for a moment, but I shook the thought out of my head. There was no point in making myself anxious. Were you just as promiscuous back then, too? Promiscuous? That's rather rude. I suppose I was, though. But back in those days, we all used to sleep in our underwear, or the nude. Ghislaine didn't even know what a bra was at first. You should have seen the way Paul ogled her. It was hard to imagine Ghislaine being quite that shameless, but maybe she was just clueless. That would fit with what I knew of her. As for Paul, well, not to excuse the guy's behavior, but I probably would have done the same thing. Beastfolk women tended to be pretty impressive in the chess department. You know, come to think of it, I guess Zenith was about your age now when I first met her, Elenalise said. Really? You've known her since she was a teenager? Yes, she was a clueless, innocent little girl. Paul picked her up off the street and dragged her into our party, that scoundrel. There was a fond, nostalgic look in Elenalise's eyes as she reminisced. Come to think of it, Geese and Ghislaine had seemed just as happy when they talked vaguely about the past. They'd probably had some good times together. I got the impression Dad wants to apologize to you about something that happened back then. Is it all right if I ask what it was? You're better off not knowing, dear, said Elise, grimacing now. I don't think you want to hear too much about your father's romantic history, do you? Yeah, you're right. To tell the truth, I kind of did want to know, but I didn't want to pressure her. Sometimes a man has to swallow his curiosity. At least her reply told me it had something to do with his love life now. He'd apparently been in a physical relationship with Ghislaine at some point, so it wouldn't surprise me if he'd been sleeping with Elise too. And then Zenith got pregnant, and the whole party fell apart. I could easily imagine how that could lead to some ugly drama. Once we make it to Rapan, I'm sure he'll fall over himself to apologize. Or, nope, other way around. Once we make it to Rapan, I'm sure he'll fall over himself to apologize, I said. I'm not going to forgive him no matter what he says. Elise was scowling again. Whatever happened must have been seriously ugly. Paul really was a good-for-nothing bum. But that exactly was why I had to help him out. Guys like him and me had to look out for each other. If worst came to worst, I'd just have to beg Elise to forgive him myself. The 7th day started off like the 6th, and we made steady progress north while fighting off griffins. This rock shelf went back further than I'd expected. Maybe it was more of a mountain. While the top was mostly flat, we couldn't see far in any direction thanks to the giant boulders strewn randomly across its surface. Every once in a while, though, we'd come across a more open area. This was where the local griffins would attack us. We beat them down, then forge ahead. Rinse and repeat. Oh, but then, quite suddenly, the rock shelf came to an end. Well, it's about time. The ground far below us wasn't barren desert anymore. There was a smattering of trees and plants down there. It looked kind of like a savanna without much in the way of grass. In the distance was a large lake, with white roofs clustered all around. We'd found the city of Bazaar. On our 8th day on the Beggarit continent, we lowered ourselves down off the rock shelf and headed for Bazaar. From our vantage point, the city looked a bit like a donut. The big round lake in the middle was surrounded by a ring of white frosting tents and buildings, with a small green area on the outskirts. Come to think of it, I hadn't eaten anything sweet in a while now. We're finally here, sighed Elise. That was quite a hike, I must say. Yeah, no kidding. It feels like we covered a lot of ground in the last week. I suppose the monsters made it feel even longer than it was. The ground in this area wasn't just sand. There was actual soil here, although its reddish-brown color suggested it wasn't particularly rich, and the plains were dotted with sizable boulders and a few scraggly plants. It reminded me a bit of the Demon Continent, actually. At least it was easier to walk on, and the temperature was much less extreme here. There was a stark difference in climate compared to the desert on the other side of that rock shelf. By the time we reached the outskirts of Bazaar, it was already evening, and bats were starting to flutter through the sky. They didn't swoop down to attack us, though, and there weren't any succubi accompanying them. They were just ordinary bats. Still, there might be other monsters lurking around, even if we were close to the city now. We stayed alert as we approached it. Just as we were getting close, there was a piercing cry from somewhere nearby. Recognizing the call of a griffin, the two of us instantly tensed up. Is it coming for us? No, I don't think so. They're fighting over there, see? Elise was peering at something up ahead of us, but I couldn't make out what she was looking at. Who is it? I couldn't say. We moved forward cautiously in the direction of the city. Soon enough, I spotted a small group of people fighting a pack of griffins up ahead. There were 4 humans and 5 of the monsters. Well, there had been 6 humans, but 2 of them were lying motionless on the ground. Of the 4 survivors, 1 was crouching down and clutching his head rather than fighting. In other words, it was 3 against 5. The outnumbered humans were fending off the griffins with sizable broadswords. They were a well-coordinated group, but it was obvious that they were starting to get tired. Should we help them out, Elise? She shrugged her shoulders. She shrugged her shoulders noncommittally. I'll leave it up to you. Let's do it then. Abandoning them would probably leave a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't see any reason not to ride to the rescue. All right, cover me. Got it. Elise was already rushing forward. As she approached, I fired off a shockwave blast at a griffin that was currently in the air. My spell was a direct hit. The monster had been focused on the enemies in front of it. The blast wasn't enough to kill it instantly, but it did send it tumbling to the ground, spraying feathers in all directions. Elenalise leapt on the fallen beast and stabbed it in the neck with her sword. I fired off more wind spells in quick succession. My second target went down from a single blast, but the third managed to evade my spell. The creatures were aware of my attacks at this point, but they also had armed warriors in front of them, and Elenalise was blocking their path to me. I was free to fire off as many spells as I wanted without fear of retaliation. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. Kah! Once I'd picked off 4 of the monsters, the last of them tried to flee. I finished it off with a stone cannon to the back. It was never smart to let a wounded, desperate beast go free. With the battle over, Elenalise and I sheathed our weapons and approached the group of warriors. "Eh, is it over?" The man who'd been crouching down and quivering finally raised his face. After looking around the area nervously, he smiled in obvious relief. The warriors who'd been fighting the griffins turned and approached him. Rising to his feet, the man immediately began shouting at them. "What are you standing around for, you? Standing around for? You! Get out there and start looking!" The warrior he'd addressed nodded and immediately ran off. "Good grief, what a disaster," the man muttered. "What on earth was a pack of griffins doing all the way out here, anyway?" Shaking his head, he turned and approached us with the other 2 warriors at his side. "Your assistance was most kind, travelers. Allow me to express my gratitude." The man wore a turban and a red robe underneath a thin yellow gown of sorts. There was a small red dot in the middle of his forehead. He had a long, skinny mustache, but it didn't make him look especially imposing. He struck me as more of a timid sort. The very picture of a stereotypical desert merchant, too. That was fine by me. "Well, it looked like you were in some trouble," I said. "We couldn't just abandon you." "Most people certainly would have." The man was speaking in the fighting god tongue, so I'd replied in kind. Fortunately, he appeared to understand me just fine. That was a hopeful sign. "May the blessings of the wind grace you and yours." With those final words, the man promptly turned and walked back to his fallen companions. Not the most expressive sort, then. The 2 other members of his party were fighters who wore red armor and thick skirt-like garment around their waists. They were more heavily equipped than the average Central Continent warrior. The weapons at their hips were large, curved swords with thick, er, with thick, with thick blades more than a meter in length. I'd often seen similar scimitars on the Demon Continent. Actually, they were probably effective against larger monsters. Still, such heavy arms and armor wasn't ideal for fighting agile monsters like griffins. Maybe that was part of the reason they'd been struggling. "Don't see mages too often in these parts." The one who spoke up first was a huge. Don't see mages too often in these parts. The one who spoke up first was a huge man with a patch over his left eye and a tattoo covering his face. He was nearly 6 feet tall and probably around 40 years old, obviously a seasoned veteran. "Hey, boss, is that girl a succubus?" The other warrior was a girl, with light brown skin, who was staring at Elenalise. I couldn't see much of her underneath the armor, but she looked muscular. I would have guessed she was in her mid-20s. "What is she saying, Rudius?" said Elenalise in the human tongue, looking a bit confused. She didn't speak the local language here. "She's wondering if you're a succubus," I told her, also in human tongue. "Well, I suppose I am, in a manner of speaking." Wow, she admits it. "That said, I don't make a habit of spraying foul odors all over the place." "I keep telling you, they smell really good to me." The huge man turned to his companion and chopped her on the head. "Don't be an idiot. What kind of succubus travels with a man? You've got some nerve insulting them after they saved our lives." The woman whimpered pitifully in reply. "Ow! But boss, you said a girl who shows up when there's bats around gots to be a succubus." It took some effort to understand what she was saying. Maybe her accent was just really strong. I could make out the words, but it wasn't easy. "This is exactly why they call you Bonehead, kid." The man, on the other hand, spoke more clearly. I didn't know if he was more fluent in fighting god tongue or what, but I understood him much easier. Sighing, he turned to Elenalise to apologize. "Sorry, miss. We didn't mean no offense. Carmelita here is kind of a moron, that's all." Elenalise looked away in my direction. looked awkwardly in my direction. She had no idea what the man was saying to her. What's this now? She asked me. Is he trying to make a move on me or something? No, he's apologizing because the woman called you a succubus. Ah, is that all? Well, tell them I wasn't offended at all. And Elise turned her most brilliant smile on the big man, prompting him to blush fiercely. She says she doesn't mind, I added helpfully. No kidding. Does she not speak our language or something? Nope. I can interpret for her, though. The big man was openly staring at Elise now. It wasn't hard to guess what he might be thinking. That's a fine woman there. Or something along those lines. Maybe too bad she's kind of flat-chested. Elise didn't seem to mind the ogling. If anything, she looked kind of proud to be ogled. I guess she was used to it by now. Pulling his gaze away from Elise, the man looked over at me again. My name's Belabadom. Thanks again for your help, stranger. I'm Rudius Greyrat, and this is Elise. Got it. Well, if you ever need anything... Hey, what's the holdup, you two? Shouted the mustached man we'd spoken to earlier, interrupting the warrior mid-sentence. We need to find that cargo now! Whoops, sorry. Gotta go. I'm sure our employer will reward you later, too. Belabadam and Carmelita ran over to their boss. The three of them had a brief conference, then split into two groups and ran off in different directions. They were gone in an instant. What? They're just leaving? I expected a bit more gratitude, said Elise. I could understand how she felt, but we hadn't gone into this expecting a reward. Looks like they left their wounded behind, too. I looked down at the fallen fighters, ready to cast a healing spell or two. Oh, they're dead. Come to think of it, the survivors hadn't even attempted to aid them after the battle. They'd probably been well aware that they were gone. This one was still awfully young, the poor thing. One of the dead was a teenage girl, maybe 18 years old. There was a gaping hole in her forehead where a griffin's sharp beak had struck her. She must have died instantly. Wait. I wonder if leaving the dead where they fell is a tradition in this continent. No decent adventurer would ever do such a thing. Well, those people didn't look like adventurers to me. Since their party had vanished, I burned the bodies with my magic and buried them myself. It did seem a little heartless, the way they'd left them here. That Balabadam guy had promised we'd be rewarded later, but we didn't even know the name of that guy with the mustache. And how were they supposed to come find us if they didn't know who we were? Did they expect us to track them down and demand payment or something? Well, whatever. It wasn't like I'd intervene in the hopes of a big payoff or anything. I'd have to satisfy myself with having done my good deed for the day. Let's get going, I guess. All right, then. The two of us walked off toward Bazaar. By the time we reached the city proper, the sun had set. The place was surprisingly well lit, though. There were large bonfires all around, like the kind you'd see at a festival fair. The ground around these bonfires was covered in carpets of some kind. People sat on these in groups, happily eating and carousing with each other. It kind of reminded me of a big cherry blossom viewing picnic, actually. Everyone seemed to have turbans on their heads. The colors and patterns of their clothes differed widely, but many of them reminded me of the tribal clothing I'd seen on the Demon Continent. Elise and I were going to stick out like sore thumbs. Not that it really mattered. I'm getting a bit hungry, aren't you? Yes, I suppose. Watching everyone feasting all around us got our stomachs growling quickly enough. Still, we had to find ourselves a place to stay first. As I was looking around for an inn, though, a man came up and called to us. Hey, you two, looking for a meal? I can squeeze you in for just 3 cincha right now. From the sound of things, his group was selling off the excess portions of a huge meal they'd made. We decided to take him up on the offer. You couldn't think on an empty stomach after all. Once we'd settled ourselves down on the carpet, the man who'd led us there held out his hand expectantly. Gonna have to ask you to pay up front, folks. We already cooked the food, see? I took out 3 bronze coins and handed them over. He examined them suspiciously. What the hell are these things? Bronze coins from the kingdom of Asura. The kingdom of what now? I can't use these things, buddy. As I'd feared, it looked like money from the central continent was no good here. It made sense, really. I'd been planning to exchange my currency somewhere, but we hadn't had the chance yet. How about this then? As I was trying to figure out my next move, that was Lenelise, whatever. And Lenelise dropped something else into the man's palm. It was a small golden ring. He held it up and examined it closely, then nodded happily and went off to find another customer. Uh, it's best just to barter in situations like that, Lenelise explained. That was those veteran instincts at work again. She'd figured out the right move almost instantly. I'm glad I've got you around, Lenelise. You really know your stuff. There's no need for flattery, dear. We settled down on the carpet to wait for our food. This brought back some very old memories from my previous life in Japan. I hadn't been doing much sitting on the ground lately. Here you go, folks! We hadn't placed an order or anything, but our food came anyway. The main dish was a thick white bean soup with some mysterious chunks in it. But we had spicy steamed meat on the side. There was also a strange tropical fruit with a slightly sour taste, which they'd covered in a sweet sauce of some kind. The sweet soup, spicy meat, and sour fruit made for an interesting combination. The meal seemed a little lacking on the carbs department, but once I got started, I found myself enjoying it a lot. The soup was particularly good. The mystery white chunks floating around in it turned out to be rice rather than meat. So it was a kind of rice gruel? I hadn't been expecting to find rice here, of all places. There couldn't possibly be any rice paddies in this climate, so they had to be growing in a dry soil. I'd heard that was possible, although more challenging to pull off. It was definitely a pleasant surprise, and I ended up gobbling down the soup in no time at all. My love for rice had only grown stronger over the years. Just getting a cup of it in my belly made me feel invincible, like I was ready to take on the world. I'd have to see if it was possible to cultivate rice in the Northern Territories somehow. If I taught Aisha the basics of planting crops, maybe she'd get a little field growing in our yard. Then again, it probably wouldn't be right to turn my little sister into an agricultural worker for my own pleasure. Oh, you're not whining about the food for once, Rudius? That's unusual. Well, it was better than I was expecting, honestly. I even ended up asking for seconds. I never complained about Sylvie's cooking or anything, just to be clear, but rice definitely held a special place in my heart. If I only had some eggs and soy sauce to go with it, everything would be perfect. I could always raid a Garuda nest for the eggs, right? They were basically just giant chickens after all. That just left the soy sauce. Maybe this continent would surprise me again and I'd find some for sale in the market. Let's see if we can't find ourselves an inn then. But of course, we weren't here on vacation. If we had a little extra time after saving Paul, maybe I could pursue this little side project. Now wasn't the time. Right, said Elise. I think it's best we leave finding a guide until tomorrow. Most of the merchants around us were already closing up shop and heading home. The bonfires were going out one by one, and people seemed to be getting ready for bed. It seemed a little early to me, but we clearly weren't going to be able to hire anyone tonight. Spotting the man who'd sold us our meal earlier, I called out to him. Excuse me, are there any inns around here? Inns? What are you talking about? Just sleep wherever you want. Interesting. Apparently visitors to Bazaar who hadn't brought their own tent just slept out under the stars. We could always make ourselves a shelter with my magic, though. Where should we settle down, then? Asked Elise. It looks like people are clustering closer to the water. Okay, then. Let's set ourselves back a little bit from the crowd. The two of us picked our way around for a while, then found a nice open spot midway between two larger tents. There were guards hanging around outside them, so we probably wouldn't have to worry about any thieves. I made our shelter on the larger side this time. It took longer to create than usual, but we'd have more space to spend the night in. Once the sun rose, it would probably get brutally hot in here really quick, so we wouldn't be using it longer than that. Phew. Well, at least we made it this far, right? So far, so good. Dropping our bags on the ground, we allowed ourselves to breathe a sigh of relief. Still, we're only halfway there. Let's make sure we stay on our toes. First things first, agreed Elise. Tomorrow, we'll buy the provisions we need to find ourselves a guide. And find ourselves a guide. We spent a few minutes quickly going over our priorities. First and foremost, we needed to exchange our money, buy provisions, confirm the route to Ripan, and hire a guide. We also took a little time to maintain our equipment. Elise cleaned her sword and shield, and I looked over our protective gear for any damage. This was just a part of our daily routine by now. After a few minutes, we finished up and spread out the furs we used for our bedding. But just as I was about to turn in for the night, Elise got to her feet. Okay, then. I'll be going out for a little while. What? Is she running to the convenience store or something? Uh, to do what? Elise smiled at the question. To pick up a man. In other words, she was going to to reset the timer on her curse. You've still got a little more time, don't you? Elenise's curse kicked into full gear every 2 or 4 weeks. Cliff's magical implement more than doubled that deadline, so she was good for at least a month in between encounters. It had only been 2 weeks since we left, and it was probably beginning to have some effect on her, but it wasn't urgent yet. That's true, but I'm going to hire someone anyway, while we're here. Right. This trip was going to last 3 months at the very least. Given how uncertain we were about what lay ahead of us, 4 months was probably a more likely estimate. Even in the best case scenario, Elise would need to sleep with someone at least once in that time. There was no getting around it. Okay then, I guess I'll see you later. No. Okay then, I guess I'll see you later. Yes, I'll be back eventually. Don't wait up for me though. Get your sleep in. Well, okay, but you don't speak the language here, do you? That won't be an issue. This sort of thing works the same way anywhere you go. With that, Elise left the shelter and walked off into the city. The next morning, I jerked awake to screams of ant attack as an army of phalanx ants descended on the city. And then I woke up for real. For once, I'd actually gotten a full night's sleep, and my dreams had mostly been pleasant. I remembered one that involved Aisha and Norn demanding that I carry them on my shoulders. When I hefted Norn up there, when I hefted Norn up there, Aisha would sulk, and when I switched to Aisha, Norn started bawling. But eventually, Sylphie showed up and seized their prize, my shoulders for herself. I gently chided her, explaining that everyone should take turns, but she replied, Too bad, this is my seat. Too bad, this is my seat now. Nobody else gets to use it. My poor sister started wailing miserably, of course. Sylphie had been a grown woman when she first showed up in the dream, but she turned into a 7-year-old version of herself once I put her on my shoulders. It was a nice dream. When I woke up and remembered it, I found myself smirking. Today felt like it was going to be a good day. Looking over, I saw Elise fast asleep, a satisfied expression on her face. It looked like she'd had fun last night. That was good to know, although I felt a little bad for Cliff. In the morning hours, Bazaar had completely transformed itself. The quiet of the night gave way to a burst of lively commerce. Merchants spread out their goods outside their tents and called out loudly to everyone who passed by. I got big juicy melons here. Last chance, folk. They're all gone tomorrow. Or folks, Griffin's Claws here. 30 cents if you buy now. Anyone got Nania cloth? I've got Tokotsu fruit to trade. The sellers shouted out their prices, while their prospective customers yelled back offers just as loudly. Some were exchanging currency, but many were bartering too. The market crowd seemed to stretch out all around us as far as the eye could see. Here and there I saw scuffles or fistfights breaking out, but they seemed to be quarrels between merchants, rather than anything really dangerous. I've got glass bottles from Vega. I won't be taking these any farther east. Anybody need to stock up? Glass products in particular seemed to be a focus of trade. I had to assume it was a major industry in this region. One merchant had shelves and shelves full of rectangular containers with intricate symbols carved into their surface. They looked a bit like fancy whiskey bottles. Some were brightly colored, but they were all remarkably smooth and clear. The central continent had glass as well, but it tended to be thin and only semi-transparent. I'd heard that the richer parts of Asura had artisans who made good glass, but this region probably produced the real quality stuff. Of course, even this glass wasn't comparable to what I'd gotten used to back in Japan, but some of their pieces were obviously handcrafted with care. I found myself tempted to buy something as a souvenir. Rudius, we didn't come here to shop for gifts. Yeah, I know. As the market bustled all around us, Elise and I got to work on our to-do list from the night before. First of all, we needed money. The currency around here seemed to be Sincha, something unfamiliar to me, which was kind of exciting in a way. In the central continent, everyone tended to use simple names like gold coins. The currency itself wasn't particularly different from any other, though. It was just a small round piece of gold with a design poorly stamped onto its surface. I'd seen some of these before, actually, when I was passing through Eastport with Eris. Whatever. We sold off some of the things we'd brought along with us and got our hands on a fair amount of this local currency. It seemed like barter was very common here, but it was always smart to have some cash in your pocket. The things we'd brought from the central continent fetched very good prices. To my surprise, a few cheap cuts of jerky sold for 3 times what we'd paid for them. We might have been able to negotiate them even higher if we'd tried. I felt like there was an opportunity to rake in some real cash by selling off meat here and buying up glass to sell back in Renoa, but trying to make money off that teleporter was just asking for trouble. For now, we secured ourselves about 5,000 Sentia to pay for our short term needs. I wasn't sure how much we'd end up needing, but our dinner yesterday had only been 3 Sentia. We'd probably be fine for some time. With our money issues sorted, we started gathering information about Rapan. It was apparently a major city, so this wasn't difficult. As Nanahoshi had assured us, it was apparently about a 1 month journey to the north. I asked about the road there as well. We just got a sense for what we were up against. Or no, just to get a sense of what we were up against. So the usual route is to head through the Knots. Yeah, that's how I'm going to read that. Through the Knots region and take the long way around the desert. But there's been a lot of bandits out that road recently, so it ain't safe. The smarter merchants are cutting right through the Ucho Desert these days. You'd head east till you hit the marker, then go north to the oasis. From there, it's a winding road over to the west for a while. Once you see the Kara Mountains, you keep them on your left and head north to the next oasis. From there, the desert's a little less brutal off to the east. You push your way through that as fast as you can, then head northwest to rejoin the normal road. It was nice to get such a detailed reply, but none of this meant anything to me. There were lots of references to specific places I didn't know about, most of which sounded like generic mountains or patches of desert. I got the basic message that there were two routes to choose from, but if we tried to follow either, we'd probably get ourselves lost. Are there maps of this area for sale or anything? I asked. Maps weren't always reliable, but they helped. You could usually at least get a general sense of where you were. That was always reassuring. Maps? Who the hell would bother making something like that? It didn't sound like we'd have much luck on this front. This continent had found its Ino Tadataka yet, or hadn't found its Ino Tadataka yet. We clearly needed to find ourselves a trustworthy guide after all. Okay, then, do you know where we can find someone who'd be able to guide us to Rapan? I'd assumed this wouldn't be a problem, but I'm sure there are people who know the way, but you're not going to find any guides looking for customers here. The city's more of a way station on the road. Or this city's more of a way station on the road. Wait, really? Yeah, I mean, usually you'll want to travel between the bigger trade hubs, right? Ah, I see. That did make sense now that I thought about it. Why hadn't I realized this might be an issue before? Elise had assumed we'd find a guide quite easily, but her experience didn't really apply here. When she visited an unfamiliar land for the first time, she always started off at border cities where travelers were common, but this time we'd used a teleporter to jump right into the middle of the continent instead. That difference had thrown us off. Things already weren't going as planned. Still, there was no point in panicking. Life always throws some curveballs at you. We'd only been out here for 2 weeks, and the journey would normally have taken an entire year. That was some impressive progress, no matter how you looked at it. What would you normally do in a situation like this, Elise? Push straight through on the shortest possible route? To be honest, though, I've had enough of walking through the desert for a while. Yeah, same here. What do you think then? Maybe we can tag along with a merchant making their way to Rapan. That sounds like a plan. Let's see if we can find one. Aisha had managed to reach Renoa quickly by hitching rides with merchant caravans. There was no reason we couldn't use the same trick. We didn't need to rush even. The only thing that mattered was getting to our destination safely. Sir, would you happen to know of any merchants who are on their way to Rapan? There wouldn't be any caravans actively looking for guards here for the same reason that there weren't any guides to be found. But Elise was an S rank adventurer and I was a Water Saint tier magician. If we offered money and our services, we might find someone willing to bring us with them. Unfortunately, the man told us there weren't many people heading to Rapon in general. Most of the traveling merchants were on their way to a place called Kinkara in the east. There was some traffic to the north, though. There was some traffic to the north, though. Rapon was famous for its labyrinths, which produced a steady stream of valuable magic items. If you stocked up on those, you could sell them at high prices in other cities. Some merchants made their living that way. Most of them brought magic stones and crystals from the southwest up to Rapon, where they sold their cargo and funneled the profits into buying magic items. Good lord. Hold on. Okay. Fuck, where did I go? Concurrent east, some traffic. Most of them brought magic stones and crystal. Upon where they sold their car. Okay. Don't know if there's anyone like that around right now, though, the man concluded. We'll definitely get a bunch in a few months at least. This wasn't too reassuring. I was starting to think we might be better off just hitching a ride to that city out east. We'd be going out of our way, but at least we'd reach a trading hub where we might find a guide. Still, I tried asking around the city for a while. Almost everyone was headed to Kinkara, and after an hour or two, I'd very nearly resigned myself to this route. But then, just as I was getting ready to give up, we stumbled on a lead. Oh, Rapon? You'll be wanting Galban, then. I think he pitched his tent over on the west side of the river. Go see if you can find him. Elise and I immediately went looking for this Galban. He'd evidently made his fortune by traveling the route between Rapon and a city called Tenorio, bringing magic stones to Rapon and taking magic items back. People said he traveled in a caravan of 6 camels, which meant he was earning good money. It didn't take much asking around before we found the tent that we were looking for. It wasn't that huge, but there were in fact 6 camels tethered out front. As we approached, a brown-skinned woman emerged from inside the tent. She wore a breastplate and a skirt-like wrap around her waist. You couldn't see her muscles under the gear, but she looked pretty strong. It took me a few seconds to realize that this was actually Carmelita, the same warrior we'd met yesterday. Hey, you're those people from yesterday. Apparently, she remembered us as well. Although she looked surprised to see us, it seemed the mustached little man we'd saved yesterday was Galban himself. Good thing we'd decided to help. Galban welcomed us with a warm smile as we stepped inside his tent. My apologies for yesterday, friends. We were supposed to see, to see you'd already, we were surprised to see you'd already left by the time we got back. Apparently, they had run off to track down their camels, which had fled in the chaos, along with the valuable cargo they were carrying. They'd They'd returned to the spot of the battle afterward, only to find that we'd buried their comrades' bodies and disappeared. Galban claimed to have spent a good deal of time trying to find us that evening. You could have just explained that before you disappeared, then. Still, maybe that was just common sense in a place like this. Your cargo comes first and everything else can wait. It must be fate that you found us like this. Would you care to join my caravan as bodyguards? He'd been looking to hire new sword arms anyway, from the sound of things. That made sense, since he'd lost a few yesterday. How about 500 cincha to Rapon? What do you say? Judging from the way he rattled off compliments on our elegant defeat of the Griffins, he'd had this idea in mind from the start. I seem to remember him being curled up in a ball for the entire battle. But whatever this was exactly, we needed. But whatever, this was exactly what we needed. All right, sure. We'll come with you as far as Rapon, then. Ah, splendid. That's truly wonderful. I'd even be willing to sign you both a long-term exclusive contract if you're interested. I've never seen a magician of your caliber before. I'd make it worth your while. I assure you. How about 10,000 cincha a year? No, wait. Balabadom would kick up a fuss. Would 8,000 be enough? The offers were starting to get a little too ambitious, so I ended up having to interrupt. I'm sorry, but we've got something we need to take care of in Rapon. We'll keep the offer in mind, though. Galban accepted this easily enough. We'd found our ticket to Rapon. Everything was back on track. Oy. And so we set out for Rapon as members of Galban's caravan. The head of his guard team was the warrior Balabadam, also known as Hawkeye. His companions were Carmelita, the Bone Crusher, and Great Blade Taunt. Adding myself and Elena Elise, we had 5 fighters and 1 merchant in our party. There were also 6 camels, if you counted those. I considered making up names for those guys, too, but decided against it after learning that we might have to eat them if we ran out of food on the desert. I didn't want my first taste of camel meat to be flavored with guilt. Before heading out, we'd held a meeting to work out our basic battle formation. As a general rule, we'd be keeping Galban in the middle. Balabadam was in front, accompanied by Carmelita on the left, and Taunt to the right. And Elise and I would be positioned in the back. The 5 of us would form a protective circle around our employer and his camels. No matter what direction we were attacked from, one of us should be able to intercept the threat before it could harm our client. Your classic Imperial cross formation, basically. I felt like Carmelita or Taunt might be safer choices for the rear guard, but they wanted to keep me toward the back since I was a magician, and it made sense to keep Elise closer to me since we were used to working together. All right then, let's get moving. We were starting off by traveling east from Bazaar until we reached the major regional road. The names of the places meant nothing to me, but this sounded like the route that was frequented by bandits. Just to be on the safe side, I let Balabadam know about what I'd heard. We don't know a safer route through the desert, he said. Nope. We don't know a safer route through the desert, he said. If the bandits do attack, that's what we're here for. Sometimes they just demand a toll and let us go on our way. A toll, huh? I hadn't heard about this, but if we could buy our way out of trouble instead of fighting, so much the better. Bandits were just trying to make a living themselves. As long as we handed over what they wanted, they shouldn't ask for more. To be honest, the idea of handing over cash to a bunch of people who were threatening travelers instead of working honest jobs wasn't too appealing to me. But I wasn't the one who'd have to pay in this case, so I could live with it. Still, there was a chance we'd run into some greedier bandits with an interest in more than money and goods. For example, they might demand we hand over Elise, given how attractive she was. That could be trouble. It's not like the 2 of us were old friends with Galban and company. We'd saved their lives, but that didn't mean they'd risk their necks for us if it came to it. There was always a chance they'd hang us out to dry. You look nervous, Rudius, but I wouldn't worry yourself too much, said Elise quietly. With a magician of your skills on our side, a few bandits shouldn't be an issue. You think so? I do. And if worse comes to worse, I'll use a little charm on them. What? You want to get carried off to their base, chained up and brutally... Goodness, how extreme. As long as you go along willingly, even bandits will be gentle with you. Are you speaking from experience here? We all make mistakes in our youth. And Elise didn't seem too concerned at all. Still, those days were long in the past, and she'd probably be less eager to do something like that now that she'd had Cliff in her life. Well, whatever, we could probably fend off an attack easily enough as long as we weren't outnumbered too terribly. Our party trudged through barren fields for a while, heading east. We had to fight off a lot of monsters on the way. There was beggarit buffaloes, which charged at you in groups, and great tarantulas, huge spiders that scuttled around furtively. We also encountered windmaster eagles, flying monsters that would cast wind spells at you from above. Some of our friends from the desert made an appearance as well, mostly cactus treants, and those killer lizards, which were apparently called gyroraptors. There were many others too. However, Balabadam proved capable at spotting our enemies well ahead of time, so we never found ourselves forced into serious combat. It turned out he had a demon eye himself, which was why he'd earned the name Hawkeye. The man was muscular and tall, and probably in his mid-40s. Judging from the wrinkles in the corner of his eye, you could tell at a glance that he was the wily survivor type. His hair was cropped short on the sides and in the back. It reminded me a little of the team captain from that old basketball anime. I kept expecting him to shout, "Just tape it!" or something. His demon eye was the same type as Ghislaine's. It allowed him to see the flow of mana in the world around him. That was the most useful as a means of detecting enemies. We've got monsters ahead. Ready for combat, everyone. So far, he'd perfectly predicted every approaching monster and change in the weather. It was almost like traveling with Regerd. He wasn't quite as precise on the details, but he spotted enemies very quickly. His many years of experience was probably a factor there. This brings me back a little, said Elenalise with a smile. Ghislaine used to spot the monsters just like that, using her eye and her nose. When you had someone in your party who could detect enemies in advance, combat tended to be a lot less risky. By the time the monsters came into range, I was ready to hit them with a spell. I'd started off using stone cannon, but aiming it precisely started to get tedious. So I was currently blasting them into the air with wind magic and then smashing them down into the ground. That took a bit less effort. Uh, You're using those spells awfully freely, boy. Aren't you going to run out of mana? I'd been getting so lazy about it that Balabadam eventually, came back to speak with me, looking a bit concerned. I should be fine. I can keep this up all day long, I think. I see. You're a great sorcerer, then. What does that mean exactly? It's a title given to magicians who have achieved deep mastery of their craft. Well, I wouldn't say I'm a master of anything yet. In any case, it's rare to find a magician willing to use their powers so freely. Many magicians made a point of not spending more than half of their mana supply in any given day. That was standard in the Northern Territories, too. Since most mages weren't too physically strong, their mana supply was all they had to rely on to defend themselves. But I'd never even emptied half of my tank, as far as I knew. Keeping some mana available for emergencies was basically just common sense. To desert warriors who didn't know much about magic, though, it probably looked like most mages were just slackers. Balabadam seemed to have enough experience fighting in a party to understand the real reason why magicians held back. Still, he didn't seem that knowledgeable about magic in general, given that he didn't comment on my silent spellcasting. I'm glad to have your firepower on our side, he said, but try to save mana for unexpected situations. There's 5 of us in this group, you know? Hold back on the long range attacks until I call for them. Got it. I wasn't exactly trying to hide the fact that my mana supply was massive, but I didn't see a reason to come out and tell him that either. I wasn't too sure where my limits actually were, for one thing. I didn't want to get too cocky and end up causing a disaster. At night, the 5 of us took turns standing watch while Galban rested inside his tent alone. We were all expected to sleep outside, not that I'd been expecting equal treatment or anything. I created a shelter and encouraged everyone to sleep inside it, but Balabadam and the others declined, saying they'd have a harder time noticing any monsters that might approach. That seemed like a legitimate reason to sleep outside, actually. It made me feel a little awkward to use the shelter myself, but Elenalise intervened. There's no need to feel bad, Rudius. We've got our own way of doing things, and we'll be more useful if we're well rested tomorrow. That made sense to me. So we ended up sleeping in our little hut after all. It was definitely more restful than the alternative. 2 of us would be standing guard at a time throughout the night. I'd assumed one would be enough, but apparently it was safer this way when you had a group of this size. We'd be changing up the shifts every night. On our first night, I was paired with Carmelita. Hey there. Er, hey there. Guess we're working together tonight, huh? Yes. Don't fall asleep. Well, I wasn't planning on it. While we did technically have a job to do out here, staring silently at nothing in particular can get pretty boring. The 2 of us eventually started to make a little conversation. Thanks for the help the other day. Oh, you're welcome. It was no big deal. You're so strong. So's the other one, the woman. Carmelita, the Bone Crusher, was a warrior by profession and would be turning 21 this year. Her weapon of choice was a sword with a wide, thick blade more than 1 meter in length, which she swung around ferociously in combat. It seemed like many of the warriors in this region favored huge weapons of that sort. Balabadam also carried a massive blade. There seemed to be many large monsters with thick, tough shells around here. It made sense to use weapons that wouldn't break easily. No matter how skilled a swordsman you might be, you wouldn't want to try punching a hole through an iron plate with a skinny little rapier. Their combat style seemed to be somewhat unique as well from what I'd seen of it. Your woman's sword is too thin, though. You can't kill anything with that. You might be surprised, actually. It's a magic item, and she knows how to use it. I've seen her cut up griffins. Oh, and just so you know, she's not actually my woman. We're just friends heading to Rapon together. But you sleep with her, yes? When a succubus, when a succubus comes? No. I know some detoxification magic, so I just use that. When a succubus comes, the men are aroused. The women sleep with them. It's the way of things in the desert. Oh, Carmelita went on to explain the connection between the succubi and the way warrior bands worked in the desert, sounding rather proud of herself. These days, succubi could be found all across this continent. The species was originally native to the southwest region, and their numbers were relatively low. But in the war 400 years ago, Laplace had deliberately encouraged them to reproduce. It had been part of his plan to break the stubborn resistance of the Begarit warriors. Succubi were deadly against men. Their pheromones could incapacitate even strong willed veteran fighters. I could attest to that part personally. If two of them were to come at me at once, or if one popped up right in front of me, I wasn't at all confident that I'd survive. Once hit by a succubus's pheromones, men were reduced to thoughtless slaves, but a single succubus can only bring so many victims back to her lair at once. They tend to pick up a few choice morsels, leaving any others behind. The men left behind in this manner then fight each other to the death. Once your mind is poisoned by the pheromones, every other man you see automatically becomes your enemy. It sounded a lot like the charm status effect, honestly. To cure someone of this condition, you had to either dispel it with an intermediate tier detoxification spell or let them sleep with a woman. And 400 years ago, basically no one in this continent could use detoxification magic. As a result, many young men who were virgins ended up losing their lives. There wasn't much to be done. They didn't have anyone to sleep with. They probably died wishing they'd had sex with someone, even the succubus that doomed them. I could empathize. To jump forward a little over time, the warriors of the Begarit continent had adapted to their circumstances. Every band began to travel with a number of women. At first, these were often slaves or demon prisoners, but the warriors quickly realized that the non-combatants were slowing them down. The women had little stamina and constantly needed to be protected in battle. The warriors thought the matter over. They racked their brains for years and finally landed on a solution. They could train women to be fighters too! Exactly the sort of solution you'd expect from a bunch of Conan the Barbarian types. And that was how the women warriors of the Begarit continent first came into being. At present, every group of fighters or guards on this continent contained at least a few women. When the party encountered a succubus, they were responsible for slaying it and then sleeping with the men to break the spell. Some groups even had more women than men, since facing succubi was safer that way. All in all, the women of this continent did more than their fair share of fighting. Carmelita had no objections to her role. Whenever her band encountered a succubus, she killed it and slept with the men to break its enchantment. Of course, this sometimes resulted in pregnancies, but the women warriors accepted this and would return home proudly when it happened. The baby was eventually entrusted to the people of their village, and the warrior returned to her duties. Carmelita had already given birth to one such child herself. These babies were raised by their entire village, rather than their parents. All were cared for and treated equally regardless of their heritage or race. They were taught to fight as children, and once they reached physical adolescence, they underwent a coming of age ceremony and left their village behind. When a warrior grew too old to fight, they earned the right to return home and devote themselves to raising future generations. However, there were some who chose never to go back, preferring to spend their entire lives fighting. Balabadam was one of those. Naturally, there was no real concept of marriage in these villages. It was hard to imagine anyone in that society getting romantically attached to any one specific person. Honestly, the culture shock was real. I'd read about tribes with similar arrangements back in my old world, but it was definitely hard to get my head around. I couldn't even manage to convince myself it was sexy. I looked over at Carmelita for a long moment, trying to understand things from her point of view. I'm grateful to you, she said in her halting way, but I hate mages. If a succubus shows up, go to the other woman. For some reason, it stung a little bit to get shot down in advance like that, although I could deal with the succubus thing myself anyway. Greatblade Taunt was a quiet man in his 30s with a thick mustache, light brown skin, and rippling muscles. He wasn't quite as tall as Balabadam, but their faces looked very similar. Without the facial hair, I could easily have mistaken them for each other. We spoke a little on our first night watch together, but he wasn't a chatty sort. It was a real contrast with Carmelita, who seemed to enjoy talking. I didn't have anything in particular I wanted to discuss, but time seemed to pass slower than when we were just staring out into the darkness silently. After a while, I tried to draw him out. I like your name, by the way, I said. Great Blade Taunt. It's got a nice ring to it. Yes, the matriarch chose it for me. Oh, really? You didn't just pick up the name at some point? The matriarch chooses our second names. It is so for all the warriors of the desert. Apparently, their titles weren't just nicknames, but rather ceremonial names given to them by the village elder on the day they left it for good. For those with great strength, like Carmelita, this was often something like Bone Crusher or Mighty Arm. Those with sharp eyes, like Balabadam, were usually Hawkeye or Eagle Eye. You could usually tell from a person's name what their greatest talent was. In other words. But since there are only so many ways to call somebody strong, you'd sometimes run into another warrior who shared your name. Taunt was known as Great Blade, but his sword wasn't unusually massive by his people's standards. It was just a way of saying he had physical power. Maybe there was a one-cut killer out there, too. Well, people just started calling me Quagmire Rudius, I guess, I said. I used the spell every single battle for a while. I haven't seen you create a Quagmire even once. Yeah, it wouldn't be too effective against the monsters around here. The spell was very useful against crawling, creeping, or walking monsters, but way less so against anything that could get itself up off the ground, like a succubus or a griffin. And stopping a slow, heavily armored bug in its tracks didn't make that much of a difference. I wasn't bothering to stop monsters before I targeted them these days anyway. Your magic is always flashy. If it's your specialty, I'd like to see it at least once. Well, Quagmire's kind of a boring spell, honestly, but I'll try to use it sometime if I get the chance. With a small nod, Taunt fell silent. Apparently, he'd used up his supply of words for now. As our party moved further east, the land around us grew steadily greener. That Kinkara place lay in this direction, and a large jungle just beyond it. It struck me as a little strange that a jungle could exist so close to a barren desert, but we weren't going to get the chance to see it this time. When we reached a large vertical rock someone had left behind as a landmark, Galban changed our course, and we started heading north. After 3 days of traveling in that direction, we ran into the main regional road. It wasn't paved, much less actively maintained. It looked more like a natural product of countless travelers moving in the same direction. Compared to the sandy terrain we'd been traveling on, though, it felt firm and reliable underneath my feet. That suited me fine. Sir, we might run into bandits now that we're on the road. I think we'll manage just fine, but if things turn ugly, I'm paying you good money, aren't I? Just worry about keeping the goods safe. Yeah, all right. Balabadam clearly wanted Galban to consider abandoning the cargo in an emergency, but the man was having none of it. Maybe his merchandise was more important to him than his life. Didn't make much sense to me, but who was I to judge? We gonna be okay, boss? Don't waste your time worrying about it, bonehead. For some reason, Balabadam and Taunt often referred to Carmelita in this way. I guess it was a friendly spin on the bone crusher thing. Or maybe an insulting one. Either way, I had the feeling that she'd punch me in the face if I tried to use it. Quagmire, Dragon Road. I want you two to stick to Galban like glue from now on, Taunt. From now on. Taunt, you're on the camels. No, wait, no. This is the wrong person. Okay. Quagmire, Dragon Road. I want you two to stick to Galban like glue from now on. Taunt, you're on the camels. Don't let a single one slip away. Bonehead, you take the rear. I'll scout ahead of us and give the signal if something's up. You better not miss it. You got it, boss. Gotcha. Roger. Assuming our new positions, we set off cautiously. The bandits around here mostly set ambushes and waited for people to blunder into them. From the sound of things, if you spotted them in advance and took a detour, it was possible to avoid trouble completely. Thanks to Balabadam's expert scouting, we were able to detect the first ambush in our path well ahead of time. Groups of people were easy to detect with his demon eye, but he'd managed to spot them the old-fashioned way. We took a long, looping detour off the road and around a danger. You won't find many people who willingly walk through a dog turd they've noticed up ahead, right? It's only natural to go around it. As it turned out, this was a mistake. Maybe Balabadam was spotted by the enemy during his scouting expedition, and they tailed him back to us. Maybe he'd only seen a small part of the bandits' forces, and our detour just happened to lead us into their main army. Either way, we came under attack. It happened right after we'd put a safe distance between ourselves and the ambush. Everyone was just starting to breathe a little more easily, and then something came whistling through the air. All of a sudden, Taunt had an arrow in his chest. He fell to the ground. Failing to understand what was happening, I started to rush over, intending to cast a healing spell, but Elise grabbed me by the collar and pulled me back. As she did so, another arrow struck the camel that Taunt had been standing next to. "Run!" screamed Balabadam. "We're under attack! They're coming from the west!" It finally hit me that we were in serious danger, and that we needed to flee for our lives. Elise released me. Galban and the camels were already sprinting desperately forward. I followed after them, running as fast as I could. There was a group of men on horseback on a hill to our left, and they were charging at us. They were mounted, and we were on foot. All of them wore an identical sandy yellow turban. "Sir, we've got to leave the camels. They might let us go if we hand over everything." "Not a chance." "Are you suicidal or just an idiot?" "Protect my cargo, damn it! That's what I hired you people to do." "It's not possible. There's just too many of them." As Balabadam and Galban screamed at each other, our wounded camel stumbled clumsily. Just as I realized it was foaming at the mouth, it staggered off to one side and collapsed. A cold shiver of dread ran down my spine. These arrows were poisoned. "Shh! They're coming from the rear, too." Another group of horsemen was bearing down on us from behind, and the archers on the hill were readying their next volley. Most of their shots were falling short, but a few could really make their arrows fly. Every now and then, one would come dangerously close to hitting us. There had to be 50 of them, no, 100, and that was just the ones that we could see. The word bandits had misled me pretty badly. This was an army we were up against. My heart hammering in my chest, I tried to analyze the situation. We were under attack from the flank and the rear, and at the very least, there weren't any foes in front of us. That was where we had to flee. "Rudius!" shouted Elise. "Right, I'm going to use Quagmire and Deep Mist." The spells popped into my mind immediately. Nothing else was going to work here. "All right, fine. Do it already." Turning around, I summoned up the largest quagmire I could manage. I didn't bother making it too deep. It just needed to trip up the horses. Balabadam, Balabadam, I'm going to blanket us in fog. Keep running straight ahead." "What? All right. Deep Mist." By summoning up an enormous amount of moisture in a wide range all around us, I effectively covered the area in a thick white shroud of mist. It almost felt like we were inside a cloud or something. No matter how talented their archers were, they wouldn't be landing any shots on us now. But a split second after that thought ran through my head, an arrow thumped into the ground a few feet in front of me. Gah! Startled, I nearly fell backwards, but Elise caught me before I hit the ground. "It's all right, Rudius. They've got one brilliant archer, but he won't be hitting us again." What? Was she saying that the same person had killed both Taunt and the camel? How did she know? It didn't matter, though. We had the mist on our side now. "Come on, run!" Nodding shakily, I got moving. He wouldn't be able to target us again. He wasn't going to hit me. It just wasn't possible. I was invincible. Damn it. I should have asked Sylphie for some lucky charm or something. Maybe I could have taken my souvenir, my souvenir of our first night together from the shrine. Jesus Christ. Okay. Shit. They're catching up. Draw your sword, Carmelita. Balabadam's shout brought me back to reality. When I listened closely, I could hear the sound of hoofbeats approaching us from behind. Some of the riders must have swerved around my quagmire, and despite the fog I'd thrown up, all they had to do was charge straight in the direction they'd been moving. We were up against mounted fighters here. Cavalry did have some weaknesses, but their speed was a deadly weapon in itself. I'd seen at least 50 riders rushing towards us. How many had made it past my spell? 20? 30? I didn't want to try fighting a group that large at close range. "I'll slow them down. Keep running, everyone. Earth wall!" I summoned up a thick 2-meter wall behind us without slowing my pace. A galloping horse couldn't be brought to a sudden halt. In this fog, many of them would probably smash right into it. Even if they realized it was there, they'd have to slow down and go around. There weren't arrows falling around us anymore, but I still ran like my life depended on it. Every few seconds, I paused to summon up a new wall behind us. As I fled, I thought I thought of Taunt, who'd taken an arrow to the chest at the very beginning of the ambush. We were leaving him to die? Or were we leaving him to die? No, he was a goner either way. That arrow had hit him in the heart, and it was poisoned. Even with advanced healing magic, it was probably a fatal wound. And more to the point, there was no chance we could have stopped to help him. Gritting my teeth, I focused on running as fast as I could. I'm not sure how long we kept running, but it felt like at least 2 hours, probably more. Eventually, Balabadom looked behind us and called out, "I think we've lost them," or "I think we've lost them," and everyone staggered to a halt. I was exhausted, of course, and soaked in sweat, but all my morning runs hadn't been in vain. I could have kept going if I had to. The three warriors in the party barely even had to catch their breath, though. The battle aura stuff was really just unfair. Galban collapsed to the ground, his face pale as a sheet. Even for a seasoned traveler who'd spent years on the road, running for 2 hours straight was a lot to ask. At least I wasn't the only one. We'd lost only one camel to the raid and one bodyguard, of course. Poor Taunt. If I had been able to yank the arrow out right away and take some time to cast healing and detoxification spells, there was a chance he might have lived. Maybe the arrow hadn't struck him right in the heart. Maybe the arrow hadn't struck him right in the heart. I probably would have tried to save him if Elise hadn't grabbed me by the collar, but if I'd stopped to focus on him, I wouldn't have gotten away in time. The next arrow probably would have gotten me. Elise was right to pull me away. Her experience in battle had probably saved my life. Even if I'd only hesitated for a few seconds, it might have proven fatal. Looking around the group, I noticed that Carmelita was glaring at me. Had I done something to upset her back there? Nothing came to mind. During the ambush, she'd been positioned behind me in the rear of the party. Maybe she'd been injured at some point and needed healing? It didn't look like any arrows had hit her, though. All of a sudden, she stomped up to me and grabbed me by the front of my robe. Why? Why didn't you kill them? You could have! I saw your magic! What was she saying? Had she expected me to kill that entire group of bandits? It sounded crazy, but after a moment, I realized that I'd never even thought about trying that approach. Stop it, bonehead. You saw it too, didn't you? He made the horses sink into the ground. He made them run into walls. He made everything foggy. You're not thinking this through, damn it. Use your brain for once. Shut up! If he'd used magic, we could have avenged Taunt. There were too many of them, kid. That was Haramaf's band out there. I'm sure of it. There were more of them behind those hills. But, Elise had pushed herself in between me and Carmelita. She pressed her buckler against the woman warrior and put a hand on the rapier at her waist. Do you object to the way we handled that? She said. What? Rudius acted appropriately given the situation. We were hugely outnumbered and facing a force of unknown strength. Worse, they were shooting poisoned arrows at us. He stopped their cavalry with his quagmire, blinded their archers with the mist, and bought us time to escape with his walls. He's the only reason we're alive. We lost one man and a single camel, but we got away. Would you have preferred to stand and fight? We would have died like fools, and they would have taken everything. The actual words meant nothing to Carmelita, since Elise was speaking in the human tongue. Still, her frosty tone of voice made her meaning clear enough. It was rare for Elise to speak so aggressively to anyone, especially an ally. She did have a point about their raw numbers. I saw 50 bandits at the very least, but there must have been 100 of them, or more. And as Balabadam pointed out, they might have had more waiting in reserve. Could I have killed a force of that size single-handedly? It was hard to say. But I could use Saint Tier magic and probably enough mana to use it repeatedly for some time. Repeatedly for some time. After stopping the cavalry with Quagmire, I could have quickly cast a wide-range spell and decimated the archers. I could have knocked the riders off their horses with a blast of wind, then roasted them with fire magic. It was all theoretically possible. I wasn't confident I would have pulled it off, though. For all I knew, those bandits had experience fighting mages. If a single archer survived, a poisoned arrow might have come my way. Some of the riders could have slipped past my quagmire and cut us down. And if it ever turned into a melee, I couldn't have thrown around my spells without killing my allies. Elise was aware of all this. That was why she was taking my side so firmly. And just to remind you, she continued, we're bodyguards, not mercenary soldiers. We didn't sign up to fight an entire army on our own. Is there a reason you're still glaring at me? Do you want to fight, is that it? What a willful child. I'll indulge you if you insist. Finally losing her patience, Elise drew her rapier. Carmelita hurriedly reached for her own broadsword, but before things could go any further, Balabadam stepped in between them. Cut it out, both of you. Look, it's a damn shame about Taunt, but Quagmire made the right call. The only one who wanted to fight was you, Bonehead. You really are a moron sometimes, you know that? Shut up! With a loud snort, Carmelita backed down. She proceeded to stalk over to where the camels were resting, crouched down next to them and bury her face in her knees. Balabadam watched her for a moment and then sighed. Sorry about that, you two. That's all right. It's just Carmelita had a kid with Taunt, you know? Huh? So, well, I think you can understand how she feels. She's just lashing out. Those two had a child. I'd assumed that the female warriors of the continent didn't get emotionally attached to any one specific man, but clearly that wasn't always the case. Maybe it was different when they had a baby with someone. As I stood there at a loss for words, Elise sheathed her rapier and turned around to face me. There's no reason for you to feel down about this, Rudius. There isn't? There are some adventurers out there who make a point of never killing another human being. Not many of them, granted, but they do exist. And you're going to become a father soon. I can understand why you'd hesitate to take so many lives. Her attempts to comfort me were a little off the mark, but of course she didn't know what Balabadam had just said to me. To be honest, I hadn't hesitated at all. The thought of killing those men just hadn't even entered my mind, despite the mortal danger we were facing. Hold on. Oh, hey. Of course, a few riders had probably lost their lives riding headfirst into those walls. Those walls I threw up in the mist. I didn't feel any guilt about that either, but the idea of using magic to murder someone directly just made me queasy. It was kind of pathetic, honestly. Thanks, Elise. Still, I thanked her for trying to cheer me up. Thinking back on it, she'd been running right at my side for the entire retreat. When I lost my balance, she'd been there to brace me. It felt like she'd positioned herself to shield me from any stray arrows. I had a feeling she considered herself my bodyguard more than anything else. No need to thank me, dear, she said, patting me on the shoulder. I'll always look out for my grandson. Your grandson, huh? Hmm. By the time we got back home, Sylvie's belly would be very big. That baby was going to be Elise's great-grandchild. I'm sure she wanted its arrival to be a happy occasion. Or maybe she just didn't want to have Sylvie tearfully asking her why she'd failed to keep me safe. Either way, the solution was simple enough. We'd just have to make it back together. Elise? What now? Thank you. Really. This time I put more feeling into the words. In reply, Elise just patted me on the shoulders. Despite the awkward atmosphere, our party moved steadily onward. Balabadam was surprisingly calm and collected, considering we'd just lost another of his men. His first focus was on reworking our formation. Far from pausing to mourn his comrade, he didn't even speak Tont's name again. He was the same professional, focused bodyguard he always was. It seemed a little cold, but this was probably just how things went in his line of work. His people were used to death. His people were used to this. Death was a constant companion for them. A single mistake or a little bad luck was all it took to end their lives. This was a common attitude on the Demon Continent as well, in retrospect. It was a way of thinking I couldn't quite understand. A few uneventful days later, we reached the oasis that marked the midway point of our journey. Much like Bazaar, it was mostly a marketplace surrounding a small central lake. I hadn't noticed before, but every other armed group we saw did have at least one woman among them. They were all warriors of the desert as well, presumably. Galban and the others pitched our tents in an open corner of the little town. While we were on the oasis, or while we were in the oasis, at least, the bodyguards apparently got to sleep inside too. Balabadam, Balabadam, do you think we need to hire someone to replace the man you lost? Galban asked. Shouldn't be necessary, Galban. Shouldn't be necessary, Galban. These two are more useful than your average warrior. I think it's smarter to head to Rapon with our current group than hire some new folks here. Then hire some new folks there. We shouldn't be running into any more bandits anyway. I see. All right then, let's do that. Still, it's a pity we lost that camel. These things happen. We were lucky to get away that lightly considering their numbers. Balabadam and Galban seemed to be on casual terms. It almost sounded like they were business partners, to be honest. What is it, Rudius? Is there something on my face? Sensing my gaze, Galban turned to look at me. It's nothing, really. I was just thinking that you and Balabadam seem to get along. Ah, yes. We've worked together since the days when I was just a fledgling merchant, you see. I trust him more than anyone. Interesting. If they'd spent that much time together, maybe Balabadam had always been closer to Galban than Tont, his fellow warrior. After years and years serving as a head bodyguard, it was possible he'd started to see his men and women as disposable, or at least interchangeable, given how regularly they came and went. We stopped in the oasis long enough to rest up and replenish our supplies of perishable goods, then headed on to the north. Carmelita didn't pick any more fights with me, but she wasn't any friendlier than necessary either. We didn't talk during our night watch shifts anymore. I tried not to let it get to me. We'd be going our separate ways once we reached Rapon anyway. Still, I had to empathize with what she was going through. I couldn't imagine what it felt like to lose the father of your child so suddenly. I knew how much it would hurt if Sylphie up and died on me, at least. I'd been overwhelmed with joy when I learned she was pregnant. If I lost her suddenly, the despair would be even more intense. And I guess I'm going to regret this, aren't I? Assuming the man god was being straight with me, this voyage of the Begaric continent was going to cost me one way or another. He'd first told me that when I met Elinalise at the age of 15, I'd spent some time in Renoa, but Nanahoshi's shortcut meant I wasn't going to Rapon that much later than I would have if I'd left when I met Elinalise. I had to assume the danger that awaited me in Rapon hadn't changed in that time. If that was true, though, it probably meant no harm would come to the people, or would come to the people I'd left behind in Renoa. After all, I'd left for Begarit right away. I wouldn't have met Sylphie or gotten to know my other friends. I'd have no reason, wait. After all, if I'd left for Begarit right away, I wouldn't have met Sylphie or gotten to know my other friends. I'd have no reason to regret some disaster taking place there. But now that I thought about it, maybe the regrets that lay ahead were different now. Things might go smoothly on my end, but poorly back home. Something might happen to Sylphie or the baby. Did you say something, Rudius? Nah, it's nothing. I had to stop speculating about this. You could drive yourself insane thinking about all the ways things might go wrong, and a guy like me was always going to make mistakes no matter how hard he tried. There was no telling what the future held. This was the first time I'd ever directly gone against the man god's advice. Up until now, I'd done well for myself by following his lead. Did that mean this choice was going to end in disaster, no matter what I tried? Nah, I wasn't buying that. I knew there was danger ahead, so it should be possible for me to avoid it. Still, there was a real risk someone I cared about might end up like Tont. If I wanted to prevent that, I needed to stay sharp. And if there was someone out there who wanted to harm my family this time, stop it. This is pointless. I could tell myself anything I wanted, but I had no reason to believe I was even capable of murder. I'd just have to do everything I could to keep my family safe. That, at least, I could promise myself. 2 weeks later, we finally reached the labyrinth city of Rapon. We'd made it to our destination. Now it was time to get started. Extra chapter. Nor
Okay,
Windmill's Church.
hold on. Um, so now you know the content that wasn't in the anime. because I'm pretty sure they skipped over the the meeting this troop and staying in the like bazaar. I don't remember any of that in the anime. Does anybody else?
Yeah, they probably montaged it.
Yeah, maybe, but I
I remember
also
them
don't.
staying there.
Okay, so they did
Like-
do the bazaar. I think. All right, so I just don't think they went with like a group or whatever. I do remember them fighting. Pardon me. I do remember them fighting the griffins on top of the basin, like on
Yeah.
yeah. I remember
think
that.
I think after the first succubus attack, that was pretty much it, and then the griffin stuff, and then after that, they kind of just
They kinda
montaged
showed
their
up-
way to the rest of it.
They showed up at Rapon pretty quickly.
Yeah,
So
I believe
this whole
so.
like a whole chapter or two of content just kind of like glossed over. I get that they wanted to have a happy Father's Day moment, but you know. But
Happy
yeah.
Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day. Okay, so
Yep.
here's the thing. We can technically save this for next week and just let the silliness commence on just doing like probably less than 11 pages instead of trying to do the next volume on the spinny wheel of lunacy.
Yeah, we'd be starting it probably.
We would be starting it if we did the extra chapter this way. I think it would probably be best if we do it that way and we just finish the book next week with the spinny wheel of crazy. And then we pick up volume 12 next month. Wait. Yeah, next month.
Next Monday,
right?
you're right.
No.
Okay.
Next month. Right? No, there's 5 weeks in this month. Dang it.
Yes,
okay.
there are.
Well, then shit. I don't know what we're doing on the 22nd, but on the 29th we're supposed to be gaming. So did we come up with what we're going to do on the months that have 5 Mondays?
I would be reading the that week.
Okay, so it'd be reading the next week and then we do the spinny wheel on the 22nd.
Yeah. I'm fine doing either or. I'm fine finishing up the chapter next week. I'm fine with reading that, and then we start chapter 12 volume 12 with the spinning wheel.
No, because
If that's we go either way.
my guy, it's only 9 pages.
Oh,
take you-
okay.
It's going to take you an entire day to read 9 pages? You're not that bad.
No.
No, okay.
I forgot how many pages we had for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, in this case, hang on. Let me see.
I mean, we
if
might
it's
still go into
It's
12
9
either way,
pages
too.
to the end of the book. That doesn't mean it's 9 pages in total. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, the thing lied to me. Okay. Oh, it's 11 pages, so it is. Okay. It's 246 is where it ends, and we're on 238. So that's technically 8 pages. Well, 8 pages in actual pages, not on what. But yeah, if you want to finish this up.
I can.
Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, it's 12 on the digital version versus the actual page count, which is just 8 pages. But yeah, if you want to finish it up, go for it. I just figured we didn't want to run past 10:30.
Let me get a drink of something.
Yeah, we got like another 10 minutes.
Yeah, but I don't think he's going to go through like 11 or 13 pages in just 10 minutes.
Maybe in 20 minutes. We'll see.
Okay. If you want to do it, I'm not
We
stopping
might go.
you.
Okay, we might go a little earlier then, or later.
I
A
can
little
do it.
over.
Is no problem.
I mean, to be fair, what's about to happen here isn't like super relevant to the story. It's literally just Norn bonding with Cliff, who happens to be working at the church. But it is
That actually sounds pretty
heartwarming.
cute.
Yeah, it's really sweet. But yeah. All right, let's go.
Whew. Norn Greyrat was feeling uneasy, to put it lightly. A month had passed since her brother Rudius left to travel to the Begrit continent, and life in the city of Sharia was as peaceful as ever. It was very hard to believe that most of her family was in danger in some strange, far off land. Still, Norn's heart was troubled. There had been no word from Rudius, of course. Not that she'd expected there to be. What was he going through right now? Was it her was it her pestering that had driven him out there to face dangers he was unprepared for? If Rudius died, Sylvie would be devastated. She'd weep and weep, holding a fatherless child in her arms. Norn was just a child herself, and she might not be as sharp as her sister, but even she understood that Sylvie's brave smile was only an attempt to hide her real feelings. Deep down inside, Sylvie was suffering even now. No matter how talented a magician Rudius might be, there was still a possibility he'd die on this trip to the Begrit continent, and Norn had been the one who put him up to it. If she hadn't pestered him, if she hadn't been so selfish, Rudius and Sylvie would still be living together right now. It was a painful thought. The anxiety and regret were enough to crush her. Looking out the window of her dorm room, Norn heaved a long sigh. It was something she did regularly these days. Outside, she spotted a few students walking in the direction of the school gates. Oh, right. I'm supposed to be going home today. Once every 10 days, she was required to make an appearance at the Grey Rat family house. Today was the 10th day. Rising reluctantly to her feet, Norn started to get ready to leave. As she walked toward the Grey Rat home, her thoughts continued to dwell on the situation at hand. The resentment or mistrust she'd felt towards Rudius was mostly gone. She didn't hate him the way she once had either, but that was part of what made this so scary. What if he didn't come back home? What if a letter arrived informing them of his death? She didn't know if she could bear that now. She wouldn't know how to apologize to Sylphie. There was Aisha, too, although she didn't care about her quite as much. Her mind was going in circles. This was a bad habit of Norn's. Once she started worrying about something, it was very hard for her to stop. Hmm? Noticing something out of the corner of her eye, Norn came to a stop. She spotted a distinctive building standing at the end of a side street. Back in the holy country of Millis, buildings like these were a very common sight. Every section of the city had one of its own, but since leaving the land behind, she'd seen very few of them. Is that a Millis church? I didn't even know there was one in this city. It wasn't built exactly like the churches in Millis, so it felt a bit odd to her, but its white color and basic design still made its function obvious. Come to think of it, I haven't said many prayers lately. Norn was a member of the Millis faith. Back in the Holy Country, when she was in the care of her mother's family, they'd brought her along to church on a regular basis. She'd learned the basics quickly enough, not something she'd consciously chosen to do herself, but she didn't feel like her family had forced her into it either. It was important to learn the church's teachings in Millis. Everyone expected you to know them and to obey them. Still, she wasn't exactly a passionate believer. After leaving Millis behind, she hadn't felt the need to wander around looking for churches to say her prayers in. But today, Norn found herself turning down that side street. The interior of the church was, in contrast to the street outside, rather tranquil. It certainly felt as if she'd stepped into a sacred space. The hush was in the air, the imposing design of the building itself, the hint of warmth, it was all familiar to her. The ceiling was a bit lower than those of the churches Norn remembered, but the orderly rows of benches were the same, and so was the sacred shrine in the rear. Feeling a bit nostalgic, Norn made her way up to the holy symbol of Millis, kneeled down, and joined her hands together. She hadn't prayed in years now, but her body still remembered how to do it. Great Saint Millis, hear my prayer. Please bring my brother home safely, and my father, and my mother, and Lilia too. Norn felt a brief stab of worry that she might be asking too much by naming everyone individually like this. St. Millis never interceded on behalf of the greedy. It was important to keep your wishes modest. And yet she decided only to rephrase her prayer. Please, help everyone make it back safely. If Millis saw fit to grant this plea, Norn's family would finally be whole again. They could finally live together for the first time in many years. That was what Norn wanted more than anything. In fact, at the moment, it was the only thing she really wanted. Even if that was asking too much, She wasn't sure she was supposed to, or what she was supposed to do. By the time she finished with her prayers, Norn was feeling a bit better. Maybe the atmosphere in this church was nice, or maybe she'd managed to sort out her thoughts by putting them into words. Either way, she found herself thinking, I should come again. Norn attended her classes, did her exercises, and then headed to the church after school. This soon became her new routine. When she prayed, she always felt a little better afterward. It felt like she was doing her part somehow. But then, one day, something gave way inside her. Please, let everyone come back safe. When she murmured the same words she always did, a tear trickled from her eye. It ran slowly down her cheek before dropping off her chin. A second followed it, then a third, and all of a sudden, the dam had broken. Norn knew, of course, that she was only consoling herself by coming here. Praying made her feel like she was doing something, but she wasn't really. There wasn't anything she could do. That was how things always had been, and it was how things would always be. She was powerless, and she knew it. Sniffling, Norn covered her face, although there was no one here to hide it from. She felt pathetic and frustrated. She hated how useless she was. Why are you crying? The voice seemed to come out of nowhere. Startled, Norn looked up and around the church. She'd thought she was alone. There was a priest who ran this place, but he often wasn't around at this hour. That was why she usually had the place to herself. But today there was someone else here, a young man who had just emerged from the confession booth. He looked about the same age as her brother Rudius. His hair was long enough in front that she could only barely make out his eyes. Something the way he looked, something about the way he looked at her made her think that she was the headstrong type, or that he was the headstrong type. Who are you? The young man frowned irritably at the question. What? You don't recognize me? I'm Cliff Grimoire. I'm a novice at this church. I just started here this year. For a mere novice, this young man seemed a little full of himself, but that arrogant tone helped spur Norn's memory. She'd met him once before. He was a friend of her brother's and a somewhat notorious student at the University of Magic. Now that she thought about it, she'd seen him at this church as well. When they said mass here, he was often hanging around helping out the priest. Oh, right. Of course. Hello. Wiping away her tears, Norn bowed her head slightly. Cliff snorted and strode close to her. Something bothering you, then? Go ahead, tell me all about it. Huh? If something is making you miserable for no good reason, I'll deal with it for you. You have my word. Norn was honestly just confused by this sudden offer. This man was her brother's friend, yes, but the two of them were basically speaking for the first time. But I think you may be aware, but the woman Rudius is traveling with is my wife. I'm worried about her, of course, but I have faith in Rudius's skills. I'm confident that he'll keep her safe. So for my part, I have an obligation to protect his family here in Sharia. If he risks his life for Lise, I'll do the same for you and your sister. Now it made a bit more sense. Norn had known that Norn had known that a Lenelise woman was once in her father's party, but not that she was married. It figured, though, considering how beautiful she was. I've noticed you coming in to pray every day from the confession booth, but this is the first time you broke down in tears, right? Norn had no way of knowing this, but Cliff tended to use these quiet afternoon hours to get a bit of studying done inside the confession booth while waiting for the rare visitor. Normally, he stayed in there unless he had some chore to take care of, but he revealed himself when he saw Norn crying. Go on, you can trust me. I'll take care of everything, said Cliff confidently, thumping a hand to his chest. I'll take care of everything. That's better, more like it. Is it an awkward problem? We can use the confession booth if you like. Norn was a little wary of the offer. In her experience, it was usually wisest not to trust anyone you were meeting for the first time. But as she hesitated, she found herself remembering her brother, remembering the day he'd visited her in her dorm room. She remembered the look on his face. He'd been as anxious as she was. Maybe Cliff, for all his big talk, was feeling the same thing as her. His wife, Elena Elise, had set off for the Begarit continent. He'd probably wanted to go along with her, but he hadn't been able to, just like Norn. In that case, maybe he could understand how she was feeling. Well, actually. And so Norn opened up to Cliff. At first, she explained her brother had decided not to go to Begarit, but then she pushed him to reconsider, and he'd eventually changed his mind. There was a chance that Rudius would die as a result. Sylvie would be heartbroken, of course. She loved Rudius very much, and they were about to have a child and start their own family. If Sylvie lost him now, it would be a crushing blow. Norn knew how badly it would hurt. And if this happened, it would all be her fault. Her brother wouldn't have gone off on this dangerous journey if she hadn't pressed the issue. When she heard her father was in trouble, she'd been desperate to help. She'd wanted very badly for Rudius to go save him, but at the time, it hadn't even occurred to her that he might not come home. All she could do now was go to school, attend her lessons, and say a few prayers in the afternoon. But her prayers were just a way of comforting herself. She was powerless. There was nothing she could do to help. The more she thought about that, the sadder it made her. That, Norn concluded, was why she'd started crying. Oops. Er, what? Is that all? Replied Cliff with a dismissive little snort. What do you mean, is that all? Norn had expected Cliff to understand, so his words felt like a kind of betrayal. But despite her sulky glare, Cliff snorted once again. Listen, I'm not trying to brag, but I hail from Millis. That's where I come from, too. Let me finish, please. I'm the grandson of the Millis Pope. I was mixed up in the power struggle there, so my grandfather shipped me off to study here. In other words, I can't just go back home anytime soon. No matter how much I want to help my family, I can't do a thing for them. I'm a lot like you, in other words. What do you think I should do about that? Why are you asking me? I don't know. She didn't have, wait. Oh, no, I read it the wrong way. What do you think I should do about that? Why are you asking me? I don't know. She didn't have an answer to that question. That was why she'd been crying. That was why she'd turned to him for advice. I see. Fortunately, I'm something of a genius, so I know the answer. Would you like to hear it? Hmm? Yeah, please. Cliff's tone was getting on Norn's nerves, but she did want to hear it. But she did want to hear what he had to say. Very well then. First of all, think about the reason why I'm in this city. I was sent here because of the power struggle back home. Why? Because I'm too weak to defend myself. I'm young, inexperienced, and have no real authority. It would have been very simple for them to abduct me and use me as a hostage. My grandfather's a sharp, ruthless man, but I'm a valuable part of his plans for the future. If his enemies kidnapped me, he would be forced to listen to their demands. Norn could understand this. It wasn't so different from the reason she'd been left behind here. If she were as powerful as Rudius, she might have been traveling with him right now, or even making her way through the Begarit continent on her own. Basically, if I want to avoid becoming a hostage, I need the strength to defend myself from violence. Strength? What do you mean? I'm not talking about physical power. In my case, I'm focusing on studying, gathering as much information as I can, and learning new magic. Oh, and making friends counts too, especially if they have unusual skills or might rise into positions of power. When you've got strong allies on your side, it's harder for your enemies to hurt you. This last point was something Cliff had only come to realize fairly recently. After falling in love with Elise and making friends with Rudius, but there weren't many people out there who could tolerate his attitude, so he hadn't expanded his own social circle very much as of yet. Apart from Rudius and Zenoba, there was maybe Nanahoshi, but that was about it. So, you're training yourself, basically? Asked Norn. For what? If I'm suddenly called back home to Millis one day, I want to bring new skills, new magic, and new connections with me. I'll make use of them to help my grandfather and quickly secure myself a lofty position in the hierarchy of the church. This was all just a fantasy at this point, of course, but Cliff believed in it, earnestly. As long as he trusted in his abilities and worked to develop them, he was sure that this future would come to pass. That's never going to happen, though, muttered Norn, staring down at the floor. No one was going to call her to the Begarit continent anytime soon. Even if they did, she wouldn't be of any use. If her brother and her father couldn't deal with the situation by themselves, she certainly wasn't going to be of any help. Oh, but it will. Not tomorrow, and not the day after tomorrow, but someday there will come a day when our strength is put to the test. Perhaps it will be a year from now, perhaps 5 or even 10. Listen, Norn, there isn't much we can do now that we've been left behind. If we tried to go and help, we'd only get in the way. I know that. Good. This is the very reason why we need to use this time effectively. We need to focus on the things we can do, and we need to grow stronger. This happens to be a teaching of the Millis Church, by the way. Cliff reached into his robe and took out a small copy of the Holy Scriptures. He proceeded to recite a passage from memory without even opening the book. Atmos chapter 12, verse 31. In these times of suffering, the righteous one endured. In these days of hardship, he cultivated his strength. When the weak of heart asked him why, the righteous one told him that the day would surely come for him to strike with all his might. And when the wicked king of demons bore down on them with his great host, the righteous one swung down his holy sword upon him. That blade divided the mountains, the forests, and the seas, and it cleft the wicked king of demons in twain. Norn remembered this verse as well. It was one she'd memorized several times at her old church. The story of St. Millis bringing down his holy sword on the demon army. The power of that weapon was so great that it reached from Milicion to the Blue Worm Mountains, and then to the Great Forest, and then across the ocean. It struck the demon king at the spot where Windport now stood, killing him instantly. The place where Millis launched this attack was now known as the Holy Sword Road. The stupendous might of St. Millis is what most people remember about this passage, of course. This is. The stupendous might of the St. Millis is what most people remember about this passage, of course. But its true importance lies at the beginning. Even Millis himself was not omnipotent. He needed to bide his time and gather his strength before he could bring down the holy sword on his enemies. If you look to the history books, you'll read that the Millis army fought a great battle against the demons on the northern coast during this period. The human army's commander was Peter Dolior, said to be St. Millis's closest friend, and he died in the fighting. Pained as he was by this loss, Millis kept his focus on the future. You mean he abandoned his friend? He left him to die? No, Millis trusted his friend, and his friend trusted him. It was for that very reason that Peter fought to the death, to slow the demons' advance rather than retreating in defeat. And thanks to that sacrifice, their shared dream of victory and peace was realized. With this emphatic lecture at an end, Cliff stared down into Norn's eyes. Now tell me, what is your dream? I just want my family to be reunited. I want us to be happy again. Then do what you can to realize the goal. Study hard and learn your magic. It will be a great relief to your brother Rudius and your father, wherever they might be. What am I supposed to do after that? After I've learned what I can, I mean. Cliff nodded, having expected this follow-up question. Turning to the shrine where the church's holy symbol was mounted, he paused for a moment and then answered. In the end, you pray. St. Millis is always watching over us. If Cliff had been speaking to Rudius, the mage would have rolled his eyes at this, but Norn wasn't like her brother. She was moved by these words. For the first time, she felt that the things she'd learned in church truly were meaningful. Her teachers back in Millis had always told her to end every day with a prayer. It had seemed a bit arbitrary at the time. Why not begin the day with a prayer? But now she understood. There had been a reason for it after all. I think I understand. I'll focus on doing what I can for now. I'm very glad to hear that. If you run into any trouble or need help with your studies, feel free to ask me out. Or to seek me out. Ugh. I'm usually here at this time of day, but you can also find me at my laboratory on campus. All right. Norn left the church that evening in a newly buoyant frame of mind. She had a goal now. She would follow the teachings of her faith and grow stronger in her brother's absence. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And finished.
There we go. Just in time.
My sinus is
Exactly
hurt.
20 minutes.
Yeah, nice work.
You
Hey!
you are
Hell yeah.
a
I knew it.
Nailed
motherfucking
it.
legend, sir.
Mhm.
Psh, You're only telling me what I already knew.
Yeah.
Okay.
Moon essentially just shut up, baby. I know it.
All right. So in response, go fuck yourself.
Oh, gladly. It'll be the greatest thing I ever do with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
No, I don't think. Yeah,
only I could
until the
fuck
next time you
myself,
do.
truly.
Until the next time you do. Yeah.
Ugh.
It was like, go fuck yourself. They make toys for that now. I hear.
Like, oh, gladly. I thought you'd never ask.
Oh, I've been
Finally.
waiting. I've been waiting for
I've
someone
been
to just tell me
waiting.
to do that.
I've been waiting centuries.
Centuries. Ow.
We're terrible people. All right.
Very.
That being said,
Me.
for over 1,000 years, I've slumbered. No.
It certainly felt like that.
10,000 years
will
will
give
give
you
you
We'll give
Such
it such
a
a
crick
crick
in
in
the
the
God, give me a
neck.
second.
God, it'll give you such a crick in the neck.
Oh.
Yeah.
I haven't watched the
Anyway.
live action one. I don't think I will.
It was cool back in the day, before Will Smith started becoming known as the Slapper.
The slapper.
Yeah.
It was a different time.
Yeah.
Slap
it was a
on.
different time.
Slap off. Slap on, slap off. The slapper.
Mm-hmm.
And there we go. But yeah.
Do you think he used head-on shampoo as well? And applied it directly to the forehead?
No, I think it was the cheek.
Yeah, no, that's what we call bitch on. You rub it on your hand first and then apply directly to the face.
And then they always had to turn the other cheek as well.
Ah, yes.
Yep.
A local boy kicked me in the butt last week. I just smiled at him and I turned the other
I
cheek.
don't know why reading out loud just my sinuses are suddenly like, oh, this is the time that we should start causing problems. Because now that I'm finished, my face is like, all right, we'll open up again.
All right, guys. So that
It
being
seems
said,
like the opposite for me.
that being said, guys, we have a lot to do. Oh my God, Joel is streaming. Mel is streaming. What? Haruka is
Joel.
streaming. What?
Yeah, no, that's rare for her to see her recently.
Yeah, it's even more rare to see Mel on.
Mel was on last week though,
Twitch.
right?
But on
Like, same
Twitch,
time.
on Twitch, that's the thing that's like throwing me off.
Yeah,
All right.
she's usually on blue Twitch.
All right. Yeah, she's usually on Blue
yeah.
Twitch. All right. So you know what? We are gonna raid Joel today. And it's because we got all of his stuff done today. Like all of the Shoutier lines are done. So I know I
Ooh.
waited until the end. That was on purpose. I didn't want to tell everybody at the beginning. So there are only, I think, 4 characters whose lines are left to be cut in Overlord, and unfortunately 2 of them there's a problem. One of them's got to get another mic, and the other one we're having trouble getting a hold of. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Oh,
So-
uh-oh.
However, both characters have less than 3 lines, so it's not a big deal. One of them has 1 line, and it's mixed up with other people's lines, so we don't have to worry about that. And then the other character has 3 lines, and I can temporarily replace him. So we until we get the proper recording stuff done in time, I can at least temporarily do the voice line, so we have it there for video editing purposes. So yeah, that's what we're looking at. So we're probably like a day or so away from going and getting the audio cleaned up. The downside is I now will be working on Slime for cutting lines. That's not the downside. The downside of it is that we're using the same video editor, and I got to get Slime to Ray first, and then we can work on Overlord. Overlord's going to be a bigger project. Slime has to come out sooner. That's why we're trying to give it to. But yeah, all lines for Slime have been recorded. I just have to cut the lines. There are not nearly as many people in Slime as there are in
them the bitches.
there's dude okay, I also recorded with Explodacy or Carson today for solo leveling episode 3.
Oh yeah, I saw
Dude.
that.
he had so much fun recording those lines because he got to do
Good.
like some legit shouting and screaming and playing a proper villain. And so he was really, really happy about that. And I could not have been happier for him. It was a lot of fun. So we're almost done recording for episode 3 of Solo Leveling. And then I'll cut, once the lines for Slimer cut, I'll start cutting the lines for Solo Leveling. But yeah. And yeah, that's everything. That is my update for now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Solo Leveling 3 is the one that like the least important out of everything. I'd rather get Solo Leveling 2 completed, which reminds me, Moon, we have to reach out to Yomi again. Find out what's going on.
Right. Yeah, we do.
We haven't I need to get an update. That's all. Nothing good, nothing bad. From what I understand, everything is back on track. I don't know for sure, but yeah. So there it is, guys. You got a Patreon's worth of information by just coming and visiting us on Twitch. And you know why I'm not concerned about that? Because we don't have a lot of people showing up and watching on Twitch. If we did, a lot more people would know these things. So make sure to come and watch the VODs, or tell people, hey, they're dropping info at the beginning and end of the show. We're dropping them knowledge bombs about what's going on. And yeah, I mean, not everything. We can't talk about everything. There's some stuff that we just have to keep quiet about.
There's, we want to talk about and also the so.
Okay, I can officially confirm. Moon and I can both officially confirm that Cottontail VA will be in Solo Leveling.
Awesome.
She will be in Solo Leveling Abridged.
Yay.
We will not tell you what character that she will be. Not yet. We're going to make an announcement video talking about that. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be good. I've heard.
Yeah.
I've seen some of the stuff.
But,
Yeah.
But also, I edited Cotton's Albedo dialogue this morning, and I even reached out to tell her, like, her audio. Like, I've been editing audio as a director and cutting lines for almost a decade now. And her audio was like the cleanest and crispiest audio I had ever heard, dude. It was crazy.
What's your secret?
Yeah, I wanted to know her setup. I'm really curious about her setup.
I'm always subconscious of mine, so yeah, that'd be very
I
nice
also
to know,
realized-
to get an idea.
I also realized that I overcompensated and my volume was way lower than it needed to be for my recording. So I realized I can bring the gain up a little bit higher from now on, which is neat. But
Cool.
yeah, that's basically it. We got most of Overlord done. Slime starts probably, if not tomorrow, then it'll start on Wednesday. Moon, I believe you're returning to your watch-alongs this Wednesday, correct?
Yes.
And did we ever confirm what anime we're reviewing?
It's still the reviewing.
Yeah.
Give me a sec. Oh, Call of the Night? Have we done that one?
Or what are we doing?
Call of the Night? Have we done that one yet?
No, I was gonna let that get further. Oh, Gachiakuta. Are we gonna do Gachiakuta?
How many episodes of that are there?
However many have been out so far this season. So like, I don't know, 9 or 10.
I'm probably the only one that hasn't watched it yet. I mean, we can do that.
Yeah, dude, trust me when I say this, it's probably just you and me. Yeah. All right. Guys, you guys ready to raid Joel?
Yeah.
Or did any of you have any other updates that you wanted to share before we go? Joel's playing
No.
BioShock 2.
Not at the moment. Thank you.
All righty.
Oh yeah, I've got and definitely maybe I can check out for later.
Language.
I don't think chat could hear. It was just a series of bleeps.
Yeah, I got you. All right, guys. that being said, we're gonna go ahead and raid Joel. Make sure to wish him. Make sure to tell him to have a good dog, and I'll tell him that the Shaltier lines got finished today. Really good. Looking forward to it. It's
Hell
very
yeah.
fun.
We should call it a tier raid or something.
A tier raid? No.
A shall or a tier. I don't know. I don't know about if a shall
No,
raid
it's a
works
fat
as
dog
well as a
raid.
tier raid.
It's a fat dog raid. It's just a fat dog raid. Wish him a good dog. That being said, guys, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Take care and bye for now. We'll be back
Bye-bye.
next week with volume 12.
Hooray.
Hooray. And there was much rejoicing.
Yay!
All right.
Nah.
Ending.
Clap.